In terms of the good things people should be focusing on then, so we know the importance of gut health. In terms of those foods or the types of foods that you would love people to be focusing on more, what are they?
Well, gut-friendly foods. So, I'm hoping one day we'll have a nice label on the food that gives it like a calorie score, a gut-friendly score. And you are seeing some of the companies starting to have these labels on it, but it's the Wild West. Anyone can put anything on at the moment. You don't trust it. So what you got to think of is, what do your microbes want to eat when you're picking a meal? And generally, if you pick foods that your microbes are going to be happy eating, they're going to be good for you, and they're also going to be good for the planet. So as a very general rule, that's a pretty good one. And what microbes like to eat is they like to eat predominantly plants. They like to eat high fiber plants that are complex, and they are like a variety. So there's no point only eating one type of salad every day, even if you love it. Do mix it up, because we've done studies showing that the sort of sweet spot for the number of plants you should eat in a week is around 30. And, that's not a precise number, but you should be aiming for at least 30 plants, different plants a week. So bear in mind, that's so you're generating as many species of microbes that can feed off all the chemicals in each of those plants. So it's like the perfect nourishment for them is to get that variety across the week.
So if someone, let's say, loves broccoli and thinks, I've got to eat more vegetables because I know it's good for me. I love broccoli. Okay, I'm going to have broccoli 5, 6, 7 times a week. Compared to not having that, I guess that would have an improvement. But are you saying that for that person, because I think there'll be people listening to this right now
who like broccoli,
who like broccoli or whatever, green beans or
kale is a big one.
Got their favorite one and they have that all the time. Can you just sort of expand on that for that person, that actually that's great, but you might want to think about expanding it more?
Yes. I mean, so you've got to think of it as, yes, you love broccoli, and broccoli has lots of fabulous nutrients in it, but it's going to generate certain microbes that like eating the broccoli and the broccoli side products. But if you just changed it slightly to, okay, I'm going to have a bit of cauliflower, which is the same family, but it's got different chemicals, different nutrients, you'll introduce different microbes to your gut. And eating both together would actually create different chemicals that would be made by your microbes and have even better results. But if you are a big fan of broccoli, you occasionally go for purple broccoli, which also has slightly different nutrients in it to straightforward ones. So it's about thinking about how you can just subtly change. You can still eat your broccoli, but mix it in with other things that are similar and try other ones. There's so many crucifers that are fantastic to eat. So I think that's the idea. It's about mixing it up. It's about trying new stuff, and it's about enjoyment in food as well. So we all get into ruts. However interested you are in nutrition, even myself, I get into food ruts, and I sometimes have to go to a restaurant and say, I'm going to pick something new I've never heard of. Oh, I don't know what that is. I'll have that one. Or you go to a foreign country and there's some vegetable you don't know what it is. Pick it. And I think that's what we've got to change our attitude, that we have our comfort zone of particularly vegetables, that I think, whether it's avoiding the ones from school or it's actually wanting the ones from school, but realize that even within certain varieties like lettuces or cabbages, there are a huge range. You can now buy, carrots with 3 different colors.
Yeah.
And they're all nutritionally different. So the way they're bred and the chemicals in them are different. So for your microbes, they're seeing them as different. You might call them all carrots, but they'll be different. Similarly, different range of sweet potatoes and baked potatoes, and there can be purples and all these other things.
Yeah.
So it's that variety that's important. But don't get obsessed that we're only talking about different varieties of kale here, because the 30 includes nuts and seeds and herbs. We don't know exactly how much, but increasing studies are showing that just adding spice mixes to your diet at least a couple of times a week can enhance your gut microbes. So increasingly the evidence is building. The people who have the more diverse diets do better. So snap yourself out of your routines, whether it's for your salad or your breakfast, and try and work this in.
So you mentioned out of those 30 that you recommend as a ballpark figure, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, herbs, spices, lentils and things like beans as well, black beans, chickpeas, all those sort of things.
Yes, I mean...
Because suddenly the 30, when you include all that, it doesn't sound quite as daunting as when it just, 30 vegetables?
No, exactly. You think of a plate and I've got to get 30 different vegetables on my plate every day. No. I cheat. And for my breakfast, which I start now with a full-fat yogurt with kefir, I will have a bowl full of mixed nuts and seeds, and it gives me 8 straight away.
So you start on the day with 8.
Yeah, and then if I've got something in the fruit bowl, I chop up whatever's in the fruit bowl, a pear or an apple, and so I might have start with 10. So if that's Monday morning, I've only got to find another 20, and that's just one meal. So as long as you start thinking how you can introduce things, what meals are good to sprinkle stuff on, and you keep an open mind, and I think it's not only it's a practical tip, but it's a way for people to really enjoy food and get excited about food again, and not have this problem that in the US and the UK food is a sort of punishment because of it's a fuel and it's a problem because we eat too much of it. We've got to start getting back to enjoying it and enjoying seeking out those foods and not just eating for the sake of it, on the run. So, that's the other side of it. But, so I think there's 30 rules. Some people say immediately, oh, that's terrible. That feels like a burden. But it can be so easy. And, just by preparing big jars of stuff and buying berries when you see them and freezing them or... a new seed or nut, and you just add it to your mix. It's incredibly easy.
For someone who may be on 0 or 5 at the moment and they hear 30, what does the research show in terms of, look, from wherever you are, even if you go from 5 to 10 a week, you're going to get an improvement, aren't you? You're going to improve the quality and the diversity of your microbiome. 30 may be the ultimate target, but for some people who can't achieve that, I guess we don't want them feeling bad about that. It's a case of, look, start where you're at and just see what you can do.
Absolutely, yes. The 30 was just where we saw on the curve in the population that people sort of reached the maximum diversity.
Oh, so going to 40 didn't really give them much more diversity?
On average, no.
On average.
I mean, of course, as, we've talked about before, it's all individual. So there's lots of individuality here. So, some people might be fine on 20, others might need 40. We don't know yet. So we're setting a rough bar. So don't knock yourself out if you're only on 28 one week and you feel like you're a total failure. It's fine. I think it's an aspirational goal. The more important is to just keep it in mind. Your mentality, you're looking for that. Everyone has weeks where it's hard, they're working, they're having to travel, they're not prepared, or you're at someone's house and they're serving you boring food. You can't say, oh, is this all you've got? This is terrible. We live in a practical world. And just on average, have that as an aspiration and see how you get on.
But as you said, for your breakfast, which I find fascinating, you'll get 8 to 10, which almost insulates you from some of the issues that may arise with working late or traveling. And, if you've got 8 to 10 on a Monday morning, you're in a pretty good shape going into that week. So just talk me through that breakfast again. We'll be back to the conversation in just a moment. Now, many of us struggle to find time to eat all of these incredible whole foods. That's why I'm a big fan of good quality whole food supplements like this one that's been in my own life for over 3 years now. It contains over 75 whole food source ingredients, vitamins, minerals, pre and probiotics, and can help us support our energy, focus, digestion, and our immune system. Athletic Greens are giving my audience a fantastic offer. 1 year's free supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first order. You can see all the details at athleticgreens.com/live more or simply click on the link below. Now, back to the conversation. What I know is that people really enjoy the conversations I have with you. They feel really inspired to change. And I think hearing that you get 8 to 10 plants in a breakfast, I think may be super helpful for people. So would you mind just sharing that again? Exactly what do you do for breakfast when you have it?
In my usual breakfast, which doesn't mean I have it every day, and I do vary it depending on where I am, it's now become a full-fat yogurt, a 50-50 with kefir, which is fermented milk, kefir, as it's pronounced in the US, and which has even more, so there's like 2 probiotics in that.
Wow.
With perhaps, we think about 15 microbial, 15 to 20 microbial species between them if you're lucky. So that's also, I've got a probiotic start as well. And then I will go to my jar where I keep generally dried nuts and seeds, which I sort of collect as I go around supermarkets and other places or markets and trying to find new ones.
Wow.
And
it's almost like a hobby, a pursuit for you to see these things and pop them in this jar.
It is, yes. And it varies. Sometimes it gets a bit low and down the bottom, I'm scraping the barrel and it's a bit grainy and things. And other times it's over bulging. But I am aiming to get, because it's quite easy to get the common ones. But the idea is, you can buy easily the, chia seeds and these ones, but you wouldn't want to eat just those.
Okay.
So the idea is to mix them up with common ones. And there's nothing, it's not particularly the ones that are expensive or not. It's just this variety you can put in there. And I add also to that, I got, for example, at the moment, some pomegranate seeds.
Yeah.
And I just stick those in. Whatever's around, I will use, and whatever's in the fruit bowl, I generally chop up. I used to eat a lot of bananas, but since I did my Zoe test and realized that they are really bad for my blood sugar, I've swapped them around and I chop up pears. Pears and apples are particularly fine for me, and they will often go in. But anything I've got lying around will go in that mix. And I have that with a double espresso, which is also, people should know, a very good source of polyphenols and fiber and is very good for your gut. And coffee drinkers are healthier and live longer and have less heart disease. So coffee, so it's completely the opposite.
That's a great study to refer to if we like coffee, isn't it?
Yes. If you don't like coffee, it's a bit tough for you. But are you a coffee drinker?
I am, very much so.
But most people don't realize that there's more fiber in the average cup of coffee than in a glass of orange juice. And we all know what orange juice does to your blood sugar. So I think it's changing our idea of what's healthy and what's unhealthy. Because just for context, 10 years ago, I was eating a bowl of muesli with some low-fat milk, a cup of tea, and often a bit of a Tropicana orange juice. And that's terrible for me because this gives me a very large sugar peak, which is my blood sugar goes up from its normal level overnight to over 2 or 3 times what it is into a pre-diabetic range. So I stress my insulin levels, and as it comes down, I get a sugar dip, and that makes me more tired and more hungry several hours later. And increasingly, if I do that every single day, as I did do, it causes stress on the body, increased inflammation, and alters my metabolism. So I will put on weight very gradually and not feel as good as I would do if I wasn't having those peaks. So, and this is only new science and new technologies teaching us that, because based on those macronutrients I was having with my muesli and my tea and my low-fat milk, it was a very low-fat breakfast, which ticked all the boxes in, USDA guidelines or whatever they are. And most GPs would say that's a pretty good breakfast there. You're healthy. You're not having eggs and bacon or whatever. And it turns out for me, it was processed muesli, and you could buy expensive ones, but they're still pretty much ultra processed. There might be if you're lucky, one or two nuts in there, but far outweighed by the negative effects of the sugar.
Yeah.
So I think that's the big shift I've made. So I think breakfast is probably the most crucial meal of the day for a number of reasons. We can discuss some of the other ones, but for people who do like breakfast, do like eating it, it's the one we can all change ourselves. Generally, in our home, we're in control of the situation, and we've got into a rut because most of us have a very similar breakfast every day, and it's the one that's easiest to change and change all our habits. And if you change that, I think it sort of sets you up, your mentality for the rest of the day, the rest of the month, the rest of the year. You've just got that in your mind, that first thing you wake up, I'm going to get my microbes off to a good start, one way or another. And for me, it works. And I know the difference when I'm staying at someone else's house and I'm offered, toast and marmalade. And I was in France, in Paris recently, and I couldn't resist a croissant. And if you didn't like croissants, well, you got pain au chocolat or a baguette. That was the choice. So, you realize it can be hard, but it's changing what you think is normal, and I think that's really important.
What happened in Paris? Because you're very in tune now with your body. You measure blood sugar regularly. You measure your microbiome regularly. You're in tune with how you feel after certain foods. So I get it. You're in Paris. You get tempted by the smell. You look at it, go, yeah, you know what? I'm going to have that. So number one, were you measuring your blood sugar at the time when you had that croissant? And number two, what did you feel? Like, could you tell, man, were you hungrier? Was your mood off? Were you, what were some of those things that now that you are in touch with this, that you were quite aware of in a way that you may not have been in the past?
So yes, I was tempted, and who can go to Paris and resist a croissant?
I get it.
And I think we've all got to realize that,
there's nothing wrong with that either.
There's absolutely no problem with it, and as long as you enjoy it and it's a good one, but if you do feel it's stodgy and you feel it's just been reheated, don't eat it. But if it's a good one, absolutely eat it and enjoy it. You may want to try and have a yogurt afterwards, but I couldn't get one. Yes, so I had the croissant, and my sugar went up to 10.5.
10.5.
Yeah.
Can we just give some guidelines to people who are not familiar with those terms? I know what 10.5 is. What should it be for people, or what should they be looking for, the range?
Well, so my resting one is about 5.5. When I wake up in the morning, 5 millimoles, and you'll have to do the calculation in the US milligrams.
Well, we can stick to that, 5. Yeah.
And so it normally, well, I say normally, we know from the Zoe Predict studies, there's about a 10-fold difference in how people respond to the same croissant. So there's but the average of, if you took 100 people, they would go from maybe 4.5 to about 6.5. Okay, so you get a small increase in your blood sugar when you have something like a croissant or a baguette or a bit of white bread. And so that's a normal response. We all go up a little bit, but there are some people that go up less, and there's some people that go up more. There's about a 10-fold variation that we saw in our study.
10-fold from what, the lowest rise to the top rise?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
and you went up to 10.5.
Yes, and I've been higher than that. If I had my orange juice, it would have taken it over 11. The same as with I have a bagel, which I used to think was fairly healthy.
But for context of people, I know it's possibly not quite the same thing as it's it's a continuous monitor as opposed to let's say an HbA1c, a 3-month average. But on that, 6.5 or above is type 2 diabetic, if that's your average, right? 6 to 6.5 in the UK. Well, 6 to 6.4, I guess, is pre-diabetic in the UK. I think it's 5.7 to 6.4 in America. So 10.5 is clearly very, very high. You certainly wouldn't want that to be happening day in, day out.
No, exactly. And after it, I do feel more tired, and I sort of regret my croissant after that. There's a feel of guilt, especially when you can see the result in your blood. You get this instant sort of, oh dear, why did I do that? It wasn't that good, but I'll try and find a better one next time. But yeah, and I find that 3 hours later, I am feeling hungrier than I would have done if I had my high-fat breakfast, which suits me. But I do realize I'm different, and my wife is quite happy to have lots of croissants, and doesn't have any.
It doesn't go up blood sugar in the same way.
No, not at all.
Wow. And so there's a few terms that have come up so far, Tim, like fermented foods, polyphenols, ultra-processed foods, breakfast potentially being the most important meal. And I don't really want to come to those 4 points specifically, because I think there's a lot to say on each one. But we are talking a lot about this personalized nutrition, your company Zoe, these continuous blood sugar monitors. Let's take an overview. We're understanding more and more now with science, with research, that we all respond differently to food. The truth is, I've just seen people thrive on a whole variety of different diets. We know humans have always been opportunistic omnivores, right? Our diets can wildly vary depending on where we live on the planet, geography, climate, all these kind of things. So personalized nutrition potentially is going to help us explain this. Why are some people crushing it on a low carb diet? Why are some people crushing it on a whole food plant-based diet? Do you think personalized nutrition potentially is the missing piece here?
I think personalization is a key missing piece of the puzzle that we really haven't paid attention to, and could help a lot of people in deciding which food to eat. And to do that, we've got to do away with the fact that one size fits all advice works, and that it's all about this simple reductionist ideas. We are all omnivores, but we're all different. We're all unique. We've all got totally unique gut microbes. And I think we need to both think of foods that are going to help our gut microbes, which are all going to be individual, but also to get to that other half of perfecting our nutrition, it absolutely has to be personalized.
Yeah. You mentioned about improving our gut microbes. Have you got evidence at the moment that let's say someone has currently got quite a barren gut microbiome? They've not been nourishing it. Let's say their diet hasn't been good, and there's all kinds of other lifestyle factors like stress and sleep deprivation that can impact the gut, of course, which we can maybe touch on later. Their gut microbiome is not in a good place. So certain foods at the moment may have a certain response. Certain foods may spike their blood sugar. Do we know yet if they then spend a few months working on their gut microbiome, aiming to increase the amount of plant foods, the amount of diversity, and they improve the health of it, it's more robust, it's more diverse, do we think then at that point the same food might generate a different response because their microbiome is different?
We believe that's potentially likely, but we haven't been able to prove it. There aren't enough longitudinal studies. So the evidence base is that makes sense, that's what we see cross-sectionally. So if you just take people at one point in time and you compare them to lots of other people at another point in time, we see that there's a correlation, but we don't know its causation. And it's slightly difficult because we know that there's a two-way process. If you're sort of unhealthy and you're giving off inflammation from having too much sugar peaks, it's going to affect your gut microbes in that direction, so make them worse and attract sort of unhealthy microbes. And at the same time, we know that if you can dampen down those unhealthy microbes, you can actually improve things. So certainly in rodents, it works like that. What we don't know is yet in humans, but we're going to have the answers pretty soon as people, for example, doing the Zoe test get retested, and we can see the people that have really changed their gut microbes, can they change their responses? My guess is that it's not going to be quite as easy as that, and it's not going to happen overnight.
No.
I think it's a very slow process that could take, months and years as you change your physiology. But we do know cross-sectionally that people who've got robust gut microbes do react less to, say, ultra-processed foods and we've got some data now, again from about 20,000 of the Zoe participants, that snacking is also, you can tolerate snacking better if you've got a good set of gut microbes. So there's a sort of interaction going on cross-sectionally that we're seeing that I'm hopeful we'll see in real life. So I think that's the aspiration. That's what I tell people, is that the idea is to build up this really robust community of microbes, which are, I think, best thought of as like your own personal pharmacy. So you want to have a pharmacy that's well stocked. You don't just want to only have paracetamol and Calpol, that's it, and a Band-Aid. You want to have everything at your disposal, and to do that, you've got to give everything to your pharmacy, have it supplied with everything it needs. So microbes are pumping out these healthy chemicals, and if they do that, your body's in better balance. It can then deal with these stresses.
Yeah,
and it's not just stress of food; it's stress of everything. It's the stresses of life. It's dealing with poor sleep. It's dealing with everyday problems as well.
Yeah, what I found in practice, Tim, this is without any of this kind of high-tech testing. I remember certain patients who were quite reactive. They felt they were reacting to quite a few different foods in sort of an intolerance. And as I helped them improve various aspects of their health, reduce stress, physical activity, better sleep, yes, and gradual changes to their diet, which no doubt would have improved the health of their gut microbiome over a period of time. Sometimes maybe 2 years later, they would report back, and I've experienced this myself actually, that certain foods that I used to find problematic, I no longer find problematic, or those patients no longer would find them problematic. They would no longer in many ways feel that they were intolerant to those foods. Now, I find that fascinating because I don't have any data to prove this, what was going on there, but I suspect that working on these 4 pillars, food, movement, sleep, and relaxation with them, helping them improve the health of their guts, it made them more resilient. It gave them more of a buffer so that a couple of years later, they just have got more, as you say, more resilience. I guess like a garden, isn't it? Where if the garden is well stocked, it's got diverse plants, it's less likely that one species or one foreign species or a weed is going to be able to overtake it all and overgrow it because you've got that resilience. Is that a fair analogy?
It is, and I think the thing we've forgotten is that a lot of the way the microbiome works, the chemicals that they produce, is through the immune system. And so most of the things we're talking about is having also a really well-balanced immune system that isn't overreacting, and a lot of people's currently these modern food allergies, etc., are caused by an immune system that's just out of kilter. It's either overreacting or underreacting. Yeah. And I think that's also the key to this, that the chemicals your microbes produce are going to keep all the lining of the gut where most of your immune system is, all those cells in the perfect condition, the right tune, so that they're not going to overdo it. And if you get that system right, then you're in this better balanced state. It's like you're generally fitter. It's like an athlete who can do all kinds of things. But I think it does take time.
It does take time, yeah.
And I think what your point is that, in the modern world, we're looking for a quick fix.
Yeah.
And everyone says, oh, I've got, my tummy hurts when I eat this. I think I'm getting sensitive to this. I want a quick fix. So I've got to cut it all out. And we need to really educate people that it's a journey. It's not like there's a 3-week course and you cut this out of your diet and you're done. It's, we've got such a long way to go back to the guts of our ancestors that didn't have these problems. That you can't do that in 6 weeks. This is months, this is years, but it's worth doing. And it's not a hard thing to do, and it can be a pleasurable thing to do. And I think that's it's changing that mindset that everything's got to be fixed quickly, a quick diet, a quick healthy snack bar or whatever, some pills, to saying, okay, this is a journey. I'm going to change my idea about food. And once I do that, I'm going to slowly build up this resistance. Like if you were an athlete training and you wouldn't expect to be super fit and run a marathon in 4 weeks. So that's the real difference. And I think we're in agreement here, and they all connect with each other. So
they all do.
And the microbes, we didn't know when we started these studies how important things like sleep would be on your blood sugar responses.
Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so this crucial study, the Zoe Predict study, was 1,000 people all eating foods at the same time in precisely the same manner. We've replicated this now thousands of times. And it turns out that if you got poor sleep the night before, you had like a 30% greater sugar spike eating an identical meal.
That's incredible. The same food, but the way your body handles it, the potential damage or the inflammatory consequences of that food are completely different depending on your sleep. That's huge, isn't it?
So, yeah, and also the way you reacted. There was obviously a link. Also, people did a lot of exercise, had lower peaks than those who didn't. So that was another factor. When did you last do your exercise? And what sort of meal you had the night before also influenced the next day. So, and how much gap you had in that time. So things that you wouldn't even have thought about are all coming together, and they all interact a lot through the gut microbes as well. So it's not like they're all independent. They're sort of working together with each other. So we know that shift workers, for example, who get poor sleep, have poorer gut microbes and higher sugar responses. So we've just done a study on what we call social jet lag of people who are big party people at weekends. There might be some people listening who can say that, very good during the week, and then they go to bed at completely different times, and they change their clocks at weekends, and they have on the Monday morning bigger sugar spikes, and their microbes are also suffering as a consequence. So everything's about getting this balance right between all parts of the body. And because of the technology we've got now in measuring microbes and measuring these sugar responses, we, as you said, we can suddenly start to see it and not just guess it.
How tricky does this get as a scientist? Because it's not just looking at that food, is it, and saying, how does that food affect me with my current gut microbiome? Should I eat more of them? Should I eat less of them, depending on my sugar response? Because as you've just mentioned, there's other inputs going in, how stressed you are, how sleep deprived you are, what time you had your previous meal the night before. So how easy is it, or how difficult is it to actually to draw a conclusion what this food does for me or you or for anyone else because of all the other inputs that are there as well?
When we do the Zoe scores, for example, once you've done the test, it is a holistic test.
Yeah.
So we're accounting for your sleep, your exercise, and your meals, and your age, your weight, all these things together. So and we've talked about sugar peaks, but we haven't talked about the fat peaks, which is the other part of the test, is that we're looking at how fast the fat is dispersed from your body, which we know in some people is very slow. So if you've still got lots of fat molecules hanging around in your blood at 6 hours after a fatty meal, that irritates the blood vessels, causes inflammation, and is going to cause the same sort of metabolic problems. So it's combining all those things together gives you a holistic score about which foods are better or which are worse for you, and so you can make those choices. And at the same time, we do give people lifestyle advice. If you're sleeping terribly, you're doing shift work, and you're only getting 4 hours sleep a night, it's going to be really hard to, whatever you're eating, to be healthy. So I think increasingly the advice on exercise and food and sleep and stress are all related.
Yeah.
So absolutely, and I know that's your core teaching.
I love that there is a line in your book where you say you're very unlikely to be average. It's something to that effect. And it was very powerful, because what I've seen time and time again is that different people respond to seemingly quite different diets. And this is why I am very much diet agnostic, in the sense that I support minimally processed food. I support eating, in inverted commas, real food as much as you can. But I personally don't like to put myself in a camp anymore, or belief system or a religion around food, because the truth is I've got patients who follow a whole food, low carb diets. Some are doing it excellently well. I've got some patients who are doing a whole food vegan diet superbly well. And so therefore it's like, well, I can't say that this is going to work for you or not. And I kind of feel as a healthcare professional that my job is, yes, to give the best advice I can, but also to trying to stay open-minded, trying to be agnostic in terms of which diet I subscribe to, and go, well, actually, what would you like to do? What are your beliefs? Because I could have a particular opinion, and then my patient might come in and go, look, I've got a moral problem or an ethical problem with eating animals. It's like, okay, well, if that is the case, I have to be able to give you advice in the context of your beliefs. So I think this whole idea of, you also said that the science is now telling some of us what we already knew. I think that's really powerful, because I think a lot of us kind of know that, the diet that my mate's on, I kind of tried that. It didn't work well for me. But your research, I think, has given that a lot of scientific validity now, which I think is very helpful for people.
Yeah, well, I think what you just said about giving your patients the choice, it is very refreshing. But most people in the medical profession don't do that, and we're told there's one recipe. It's not a menu, and all the experts, and I've been told off for writing these things in newspapers. I got some sort of vitriolic correspondence when I was talking about the diabetic diets and going on these liquid milkshake diets to cure your diabetes, saying, well, listen, that's fine, but these high carb, low fat approaches may not be right for everybody, and let's also do the same thing, but perhaps with low carb, high fat, which seems to be successful. And people would attack you from both camps, saying, no, ours is the right way. You're wrong. And that's because there's this huge sort of cognitive dissonance that people just saying, well, I've been doing this for 10 years. This is my life. This is what I do. And the whole academic scenario keeps going around that. They get more grants to do that. They can't be seen to, be talking like us, to say, well, clearly, if you look at the world, there's a huge range of different diets in healthy places. These blue zones, they don't all eat the same thing. They don't make sense at all, other than in this idea that, you find the food that suits you. With, there's a few certain rules, like, don't eat ready meals and junk food all the time.
I think we'd be hard pressed to find any camp around nutrition who would disagree with that. Is there anyone who would disagree with that? Actually, some would. Some would say it's all to do with calories, wouldn't they? And actually, it doesn't matter where they come from.
Well, people from the food industry and those that they pay, and they have a lot of influencers, who go around saying this stuff, saying you shouldn't blame companies that have extra chemicals in their food to make it taste good, because it's important that it's low fat and it's low and it hasn't been proven to be harmful. So there are people that do still project that, in the same way that people were promoting low tar cigarettes. It's not very different. You haven't proven they're bad for you because the studies haven't been done. Just because it's got chemicals in it, we shouldn't knock it. And in a way, it's the same people knocking the pure food movement, the clean eating movement, sort of going the other way and say, well, let's not go overboard, and it's fine to eat lots of chemicals. So I think, but you won't find many academics saying that. That's definitely true. But I think we do have to make this distinction, and that's why I want to keep coming back to it. This almost everything. Vast number of people do agree that eating plants is good, and avoiding large amounts of regular ultra-processed food is bad. And outside that, I think there is quite a lot of room for individuality and finding what works, not only in what you eat, but also how you eat. And I think that's the other thing that's been coming out of our studies is, it's not just what you got on your plate. It's, whether you break it into portions, what time of day, what you did the day before, how much sleep you got. It's incredibly complex, this whole idea. And once you throw all those balls up in the air, it's really interesting to see how, the perfect way they could fall for some people, and how others would do really badly through that mix if they get it wrong just because of dogma, just because that's the way everyone does it around here. That's the time everyone has their tea around here. That's you've got to have your breakfast because, that's the way everyone's done it for the last 50 years. I just want, people to question all this stuff and start saying, well, what works for you? Yeah. Because a lot of this dogma about we must do it this way, we must have, it's like snacking. Why do we suddenly start snacking about 30 years ago? And this idea of a healthy snack, and it's high protein, low fat, healthy snack, free from gluten. Did we need it? Were we really going to faint if we didn't? No. And you only look around the world and see how, and I think we don't do that nearly enough, is make these comparisons with other countries that are much healthier than our own, to say, what, it isn't normal to have 6 meal events in a day around the world. Doesn't suit most people.
I read this article in The Guardian a few years back. I think, there was some book out about the French, and I think it was something to do with why French kids don't misbehave, or something like that. There's a punchy kind of probably misleading headline.
Why French wives are always skinny or something like that.
Yeah, so exactly. And actually what was really interesting is that the one thing I do remember from the article was, I think they were just saying that actually in France as a culture, there's not much snacking, or certainly French kids, actually you eat what you eat at mealtimes, because after that mealtime, when the doors close on mealtime, you ain't getting anything else until the next mealtime. And I think actually the French there's something we can learn from the French, I think, here in Britain. But in terms of foods, you just mentioned, and I very much agree with this, that it's not only what you eat, it's how you eat. It's also when you eat, right? All these things play a role, which I think your research is really helping to showcase. But why, the French, for example, they don't do a rushed meal typically like we do. They won't have their, let's say they've still got their healthy lunch, let's say. They're probably not going to be having that in front of their computer whilst answering their emails. And I know that to be the case, that it's still, because I had an interview with a French journalist about 18 months ago, and I asked her, I said, hey, look, we hear this about the French. Can you just tell me, is this still part of French culture? She said, yeah, absolutely. The only place where this appears to be different now is in Parisian offices of international firms. This was pre-pandemic, when he says that the sort of international culture of having food at your desk seems to be infiltrating. And I found that's interesting. So in terms of your research on personalized nutrition, I wonder what are some of these what's on your meal components? What has your research shown up? Is there any sort of insights you've got for us?
Well, our basic plan, which we've been doing for the last 3 years, is to give thousands of people identical meals and see their responses to them, and then start giving those meals at different times and see how that affects them. And we haven't yet got into the details of snacking or not, other than that we know that if you snack, you will... a couple of hours before a meal, your metabolic response to that meal is poorer than if you didn't snack.
Okay, just say that again, because I think that's really important. If you do snack before your meal, your metabolic response is poorer at the next meal.
Yes.
And just for people who are listening who don't understand that, what do you mean by metabolic response?
So what we're measuring is these peaks in your blood in 3 ways. One is your blood sugar level, which normally goes up about 30 minutes after you've eaten, and that is your blood sugar and your insulin level get a little surge, and that's normal after you eat. And we also measure your lipid levels. So triglycerides are one of the commonest fats in blood, and they go up after a meal. And we look at those 6 hours after a meal. And at the same time, you can measure something called inflammation, which is like the irritation in the blood, and you can measure those levels. So those three markers, we think that people who have food that gives them regular spikes of these things, large spikes, so that they're lasting longer or the fat is hanging around for a long time before it goes back to normal, long term will have more metabolic problems, gain weight, and have increased hunger, lower energy. And that's what we're showing. So what we're trying to do is to match what people eat with these responses and how they eat with these responses. And we're finding that so many things influence the height of that response, even with the identical food. So the timing of the day, and whether you had something like a snack just before it, or you had, for example, a high carb breakfast before the lunch, will interfere with that second meal. So it's all connected, is what I'm saying. So this is why, and it's not just the French, but the Italians, the Spanish, all the Mediterranean countries really don't snack at all like we do. They don't usually have a big breakfast, and many of them skip it, but they would always have a decent sized lunch where they take time out, at least half an hour to eat it. And in the evening they would have, and they don't eat in their cars. They don't eat in front of the telly. They sit down and have them, and they have more to eat, but they have less snacks. And I think this is probably where we've been going on. It's not just about calories. It's about the way we're eating and how that's changed in the last 30 years. I mean, obviously the quality of the food is also really important, because it is so much better in those southern Mediterranean countries than what we're eating. But I think
better in what sense, Tim? Less processed, less sort of ultra processed and highly processed foods. What when we say better, what do we mean by that?
Sure, very right to pull me up on the.
No, I'm just
because the whole point of what I'm writing about is that we shouldn't gauge quality of food by calories and fat level, or even sugar level. It's about the natural products, things that resemble the actual plants they came from, rather than some derivative put together as 20 chemicals. So people have different definitions of what ultra-processed food is, but if it's 10 or more chemicals and none of them are the original ones, it's not corn, it's the corn syrup, or it's the extract of something. That's ultra-processed food that has nothing to do with the originals, is poor quality food. In the UK, 50% of our meals are ultra-processed by those definitions. In the US, it's 60%. And in countries like Portugal in Europe, it's 10%.
Wow, there you go.
And it's not because Portuguese are rich. For those that don't know, it's just because they don't have a culture of eating this kind of cheap, ready meal, frozen foods that we've been overrun with. And it's no surprise that in Europe, we are the fattest, and in the world, the US are the fattest. It's a direct correlation.
Yeah, I mean, you could almost, just that stat there in Portugal, 10% of their food comes from ultra-processed food products. That in itself, Tim, if I think about that could almost cut right through all the dietary tribal wars right there, in the sense that, is it carbs v fat v protein that's the issue? Or actually, is it simply that the food that you are eating, let's make it minimally processed. Let's actually make it more close to its natural state. It's hard for me to draw any other conclusion. As I get, in certain instances, you can play around with macronutrients and get a good outcome. I get that. I've done that before with patients, but by and large, I'm not sure if we're going down the right road there.
It's the billion-dollar food companies that have been setting the agenda about research have managed to avoid any decent studies comparing junk foods against normal foods. And they've continued to fund all this work about low-calorie products, low-fat products, and kept these in the guidelines without ever talking about this other sort of elephant in the room, because it's not in their interest, because every year they're selling us more of this stuff that gets relatively cheaper compared to the more natural foods that have a proper food matrix and don't just get instantly dissolved as soon as they hit your stomach.
Yeah.
And they've had this vested interest in doing this, and that's why we're deluded into having ridiculous TV programs about calorie counting and the dangers of fats and this obsession on our labels, which most people don't understand anyway, which detract again from the quality. And only a few countries have got this. Only a few countries, but there's some examples in the book, and a few in South America, like Chile, have managed to take on the companies and the government and managed to get, instead of a food label, they just have a black dot that says ultra processed, avoid. And all the kids now understand that. And they took off the cartoon animals off the cereal packets. In the same way we did with smoking cigarette packets. It was no longer we used to have cowboys on them and glamorous women and various other things. It's not different. It's the same way. But this is, and it's all a smokescreen to cover up the fact that every year we're eating more and more ultra-processed junk food that has just got more and more chemicals to alter the mouthfeel, so it makes up for the lack of natural stuff, and it's hurting and by having it sort of, it doesn't lend itself to a good meal, and so it lends itself to this perpetually snacking, grazing world, which is really bad metabolically for us.
Yeah.
And the one study that was done on this has clearly shown that you get these two matched meals to this randomized group. It was done by the NIH just over a year ago. And there's a clear difference in appetite and going back for more. If you give people buffets of both, they liked both foods equally. They were done to be highly appetizing. But the processed food made people, it didn't satisfy them. They kept going back for more. So they ended up eating 30% more.
Yeah. That was Kevin Hall's study, I think,
Yes.
wasn't it? Yeah. I mean, remarkable.
But what was remarkable is just how few studies there are like that. Why? You'd think, these are like drugs we take every day of our lives. If it was a medicine, every time there was a new processed food product, it would have to go through some testing, and the pharmaceutical companies have to spend $1 billion to get a new drug. These guys say, okay, it's fine. And if you complain, they say, well, you can't prove it's bad for us, therefore it's fine. So they've reversed the whole argument.
I know.
And you take that with, I have this particular thing about artificial sweeteners.
Yeah.
I've had arguments with these companies, and and they have these pressure groups and action against sugar, and they're sort of sponsored by the artificial sweetener companies, and their view is, well, show us the study that proves it's dangerous. And I would say, well, you don't do that for drugs. You have to first prove it's not harmful.
Yeah, show us the study that proves it's safe, right? But in the diet myth, I think you spoke about artificial sweeteners, and I'm pretty sure you expressed a bit of concern about them. So what is your current view on artificial sweeteners?
All the data suggests that when you do a clinical trial and you give kids or overweight adults either 2 cans of fizzy drinks with sugar or 2 cans of the diet equivalent, and you do that for 6 months or so, you do not see any difference in weight or diabetes risk or any other metabolic parameters. So there's no clear benefit from swapping from someone from a sugar drink to a diet drink, except maybe for your dentist. Okay, so the dentists like it because definitely it's good for your teeth. And so that just that fact alone, think about it. In each, the average can will have maybe 150 calories. So people have 2 a day at least. That's 300 calories less. Why are these kids and these adults not losing some weight? No, it wouldn't be massive, but we're told that would be about 15% of our intakes, right? So if you believe the calories in, calories out, actually they should lose weight. They don't. So clearly, in my view, something else is happening metabolically to these individuals. Either their brain is being reset by the sweetness chemicals, so it's at a neural level, or something is happening metabolically, and you are getting some change in insulin in ways we still don't understand. And I've put myself with monitors and given myself sucralose, and I can see I do get a sugar peak, my insulin peak, strangely, with the sweetness, which I can't explain. Or more likely, it's affecting our gut microbes. And so they don't know how to deal with these chemicals, which are all derived from things like petrol and paraffin, very ultra things that we were never supposed to eat. And so they produce weird chemicals in response. And those chemicals then have a reaction on our body, which interferes with the metabolism and in a way either makes us put on some weight or predisposes to diabetes in the same way as the sugar. So we don't know the mechanisms yet. There may be differences between them. They definitely work in different ways. And some people might be okay with some and not with others because, I admit everyone is unique. But I think the whole idea of reducing sugar by just adding unlimited amounts of these chemicals, which is one side effect of the sugar levy, has to be thought through. And we should be weaning people off ultra sweetened products, which make them more likely, particularly kids, to seek sugar and avoid sour things, which may be good for them. And that's my major worry. So, I'm looking forward to seeing whether stevia, for example, which would appear to be the more natural of these ones, does have any particular benefits. But I suspect that this whole sweetness thing, by artificially creating these sort of flavors that people crave, is going to have some other knock-on effects down the line that we don't know. So we should be teaching kids and adults how to go back to enjoying things that like water or like teas and herbal teas and things that have a bit of interest in it rather than this blunderbuss, massive amounts of sugar, whether it's fake or real.
It's amazing. My kids are sort of 10 and 7 at the moment, and it's amazing how many of their friends don't drink water.
They're allergic.
No, it's kind of, it's really sad actually on a deep level, because if you think about it in terms of our evolutionary heritage, we could never have survived if we didn't drink water, right? 500 years ago, I don't think we had the choice to not drink water. Whereas now we have that choice. And I suspect it's because it's been conditioned out of them via society, via certain choices that they've been given. Because I just fundamentally cannot believe that a human being cannot drink water. But just to be super compassionate to parents who are listening who might struggle with their own children, I get it can be tough, but actually it's very unnatural to not drink water.
No, totally agree. But I think it's, as you said, part of conditioning. And, I go into the water business in the book in a fair way. And, we've been conditioned that tap water is perhaps bad for us and it tastes bad or has metallic things in it, or there've been, history of you go abroad and everyone says, well, don't drink the water. What are you going to, it could be deadly. And that fueled this whole rise in mineral waters and this con that basically, Pepsi and Coca-Cola and Nestle take tap water and they just stick it through a processing plant and rebottle it minus any taste and do that. But and then then have to add some flavorings to it, as they were doing with for kids, to add a twist of fake lime or orange to make it palatable.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. I think really important we get kids' taste back, reset the thermostat away from this super sweetness that is the problem, because they can't then appreciate other foods, because in a way everything's set so high that they need it. And
I love that phrase, reset the thermostat. That's exactly what it is, really. I think I can't remember how I put it in my very first book. I wrote about, if a child, 100 years ago, the taste of a ripe peach on a nice, in the peak of summer, that would be like a treat. It would be, man, this is so gorgeous and sweet. Whereas I think if you're used to having things like Haribos or, every day, and that becomes your definition or your normal sweetness is a packet of sweets, then of course a peach no longer holds the magical allure that it used to. And I think it's just been this steady downgrading of our taste buds.
When did you last have a grape that was slightly tangy? When I was a kid, they were always a bit sour, and there was the odd sweet one, but you like that sweet sour sort of mix, but they've virtually disappeared. Now they're all bred for super sweetness, and so you just can't get we're losing that range of taste, because, and I think a lot of this is because of sugar and artificial sweeteners, and the fact that
it is
kids are brought up through this mechanism, and that has a knock-on effect on the ability then to taste, to have bitter vegetables and all these other things. So
I think it's such an important point. I want to keep just on the topic of children. When I was refreshing myself this morning with the book, just as sort of preparation for our conversation today, I don't think I'm giving away the book when I can read the last line.
The punchline.
Can I read the last line of the book? I think it's, for me, one of the most important lines in a book on foods. Education is our main hope. We need to be teaching our children about real and fake foods with the same zeal that we teach them how to walk, read, and write. Tim, that really hit me when I read it this morning. I've got two young kids. Until they went to school, I felt we had a pretty good handle on what they were eating, how much, when, Since going to school, particularly as they're getting older and older, obviously that control, and maybe all parents struggle with this, goes away from you somewhat. But what's interesting to me is what is normal in schools now. Okay, now, appreciate your kids are a bit older than mine. So I don't know if that's changed. I wonder if you had this experience when you were a dad of young kids, although maybe you weren't tuned into nutrition in the same way as you are now. But there's a snacking culture that's promoted, right? So morning break is snack time. You have to have a snack, right? It's part of the school timetable. There's morning snack time, afternoon snack time, which of course we were mentioning before how snacking is a reasonably modern invention, certainly to the degree that we have it in this country. I know this is controversial, but I wonder if you could elaborate on some of your views on nutrition in schools and what we possibly should be doing.
Well, everything you said is absolutely true around this country, and probably very prevalent in places like Australia and the US. And it is different from when I was at school. So we didn't have a mid-morning break for snacks. We were expected to last until lunch without fainting. And I think this whole idea, and it all comes to this idea that you have to give kids regular food, otherwise their blood sugar level drops and they can't concentrate and they run amok. And this idea was probably came about. It was a brilliant idea, probably for some marketing executive selling chocolate biscuits or one of these big companies. And so they started it, and then probably promoted a lot of bad studies in nutrition departments to show there was some correlation between kids who ran amok and them not getting a snack at 10:30, right? They didn't get a chocolate fix or whatever. They didn't get their chocolate finger, and they did a correlation. They ran amok. Well, the fact that little Johnny who ran amok was the sort of kid who would just forget to to pick up his satchel or whatever, or had refused breakfast because he was a bit hyper. It was irrelevant because that became ingrained in sort of pediatrics and in school education, that it was really important to keep maintaining sort of high sugar levels in school, and this is where the problems absolutely start.
So why I think this is so important, Tim, is because if kids get ingrained and conditioned with this from the age of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, it is so hard to change that conditioning later. And we've not put this video out. I made it with Gareth last week about food in schools, and I personally believe in the current climate where 1 in 3 kids in the UK start secondary school overweight and obese, and we know how much the environment influences our choices, and some would argue, are they even choices in a very obesogenic environment? I really struggle to make the case that schools should have vending machines anymore with fizzy drinks and with chocolate bars, with crisps. I can't see the case for an ice cream van in the middle of a big secondary school anymore. But I feel sometimes as though saying that, for some reason, that's quite controversial to say that. It's almost as if, when I've spoken to teachers about it, and some teachers agree, but they say, we're too scared of parents and what they'll say, so we don't change anything. And other teachers say, well, we want our children to have choice. But I don't think people understand true choice. I don't think they understand what goes on, the bliss point of food, how they're manufactured to particularly, spike that dopamine beautifully well. So, I don't think people get it right.
There's no choice. If you put a big pile of chocolate biscuits in front of me now, I'd have a nibble,
Yeah.
Because they're specially designed for that. And kids are so vulnerable. But I agree, it's like a religion. And some people, and many parents feel, they've been educated the same way, they've been indoctrinated the same way, and they feel they would be really bad parents if they let that kid have a sugar dip or, their energy level went down. Because such is this dogma that if you don't have some carbs, your sugar level drops, your energy goes down. And what we've shown in our recent studies, and the PREDICT study, is complete opposite. You actually have a sugar dip after you have a carb load. So it is the complete opposite of what everyone thinks. And so what they're doing is they are giving their kid, if you give your kid a chocolate biscuit or whatever it is at 10 o'clock, they're going to have a sugar dip, and a third of them will have real problems of fatigue and concentration for the next hour. We've done these studies in adults, not in children, but we see these sugar dippers. They don't know they're dipping because we've got these monitors on them. They don't know what's happening, and they report their concentration levels, their fatigue levels, and it is not because they're not eating. It's after they've had that sugar load. In our case, it was muffins, but the point is exactly the same. That it is madness to think that this happens, and you only got to look. I mean, I was in Tanzania with this hunter-gatherer tribe, and I get asked this all the time, everyone needs breakfast, otherwise you can't concentrate. They didn't have a word for breakfast because it didn't exist. No one was there, up at dawn getting everything ready to, otherwise they couldn't make it through the day. Nobody ate anything before about 10:30. And usually just waited till lunch. But the point was that these people, they would go hunting. They didn't need the equivalent of a chocolate biscuit to keep them going, otherwise they'd faint. Evolution's, wouldn't do that. It's madness. And so we've actually been poisoning ourselves with the exact opposite. But as you can see from the reaction of teachers and parents, it is so ingrained this idea that you're a bad parent if you don't do this.
Yeah, and the other thing which happens, and I know many of my listeners will resonate with this bit in particular, that what it does is that when you're trying to educate and bring up your kids to know the value of food and know the value that it's for physical health, mental health, and mood, focus, concentration, etc., if you subscribe to the view, as I do, that schools should be the model educationally, behaviorally, but also nutritionally, then you just start to create that friction where, well, mummy and daddy are telling me one thing at home, but like at school, yesterday my son said, I said, how was it? And, at school, and everyone goes, yeah, you know what my friends had today? They had pizza and chips for lunch. And we don't, what's really tricky is that I'm not saying that is something that no one should ever eat, right? I get it. But I actually feel that schools are taking away some of the parental choice and responsibility, because why not let parents decide if and when they want to give their kids a bit of sugar or a cake or a dessert? I know what I'm saying is against the grain of what a lot of people now think, but I really do think schools need to take this seriously.
No, I think they need to take responsibility, because what they are doing is for the rest of that kid's life, they're dictating what's normal.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, you can have parents that are stricter or more relaxed, but your idea of authority and what's, the way the rules are, is that the rule is little Johnny has, a carb break at 10 o'clock and another one at 3 o'clock, and he can eat whatever he likes at lunch. And that is just plain wrong. And, and it's, again, because of brainwashing, you can't blame any of these, because there's no great expert that stands up there. In England, we've got Jamie Oliver who tried to do this and got a lot of flack for trying to do this, but he didn't take on really the whole concept of how much you need to eat during the day. And this idea, I was brought up on that grazing was better than gorging. I talk about it in the book, and
you do, yeah.
And it ended up this pathetic study of about 10 people done 30 years ago that doesn't stand up to any scrutiny, and yet this one study, has had ramifications, because obviously this whole industry came around it, and people felt, it's really important to keep people, topped up. And how are you going to top up these kids? Because otherwise they'll go crazy. And so suddenly it was a guilt thing. If you took it away and then they did something, then the parents would blame them, and then this responsibility comes out. So it's going to take someone brave to do this.
Yeah.
But I just hope that some people will read the book and say, well, okay, well, you can blame me now. Some head teacher might be listening, say, you know what, I'm going to change this. Let's give it a go for a term, and be unpopular, but give these kids some semblance of what really is normal.
Yeah. And
what other kids in healthier countries are doing.
But there are studies, Tim, that have shown, like I've seen numerous studies where they've shown that if a kid has, let's say they have breakfast before they go to school, but it's, let's say, based on real food, like, good source of protein, let's say eggs, or I can't remember what exactly was in the study, but it showed clearly that actually that sort of breakfast can actually not only sustain them, but improve performance at school as well, which again doesn't really surprise anyone if you understand the impact that nutrition can have all over the body. And I agree, maybe someone will read your book, maybe a head teacher will, and go, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to do this for 3 months. I think it will take that kind of strong leadership. And I thought long and hard about this, but I feel so strongly about it. In my next book, which is on how to lose weight in a responsible and sustainable way, I've got a section on schools in there, and I'm going to direct people to my website where I've written letters that people can use to send to their headmasters to try and actually make it easy for teachers and for parents who feel strongly, more for parents who are to go, you know what, I wasn't sure what to do, but if I and my mum's WhatsApp group, we all download that letter and send it in, maybe in our school, this a change will start to happen. And I don't know if it will have an impact or not. Maybe we can talk about teaming up for that and see if we can do something, because I really think if we get it right for our kids now, then maybe in 15, 20 years, actually, they'll be the ones who are adults and they possibly won't have all the problems that much of the adult population has today.
But also the kids will teach their parents.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what we all forget is, kids have a big influence on the family as well, and it's not always that the other direction. So I think, if we keep failing our kids, and, a lot of the agenda in schools has been driven by the food companies, this idea that you can have as much sugar as you like as long as you go to the playground.
Yeah.
Just complete nonsense. And it's all been funded by, big food and drink companies, and to distract us from the rubbish and distract us from the idea that, we're just feeding these kids rubbish food all the time. They don't know what different vegetables are, and they're no wiser about how to cook or understand what natural ingredients are. Really hasn't changed at all since I was at school. If you're lucky, you might be able to make a bad brownie. That's about the extent of it. And yet, everyone really now, once you get beyond middle age, you do realize that nutrition is probably the most important thing you can be educated in.
Yeah.
Because, and there's no reason that nutrition shouldn't be, and food shouldn't be at the heart of the curriculum. Whether you study the science of it, the ecology of it, the environment is becoming so important. Many things we don't need to learn in school.
Yeah.
Hardly anyone uses algebra, and yet for the 99% of people who never use it, they're told it. Well, let's start changing some of the things that we do insist on curricula.
Yeah.
And what we're talking about schools, same goes in medical school, but in a way that's a whole other conversation.
That's a whole other conversation.
but I think and in a way, I think getting it right for schools and teachers is probably more important. And again, it's this idea of from the ground up.
I think teachers will love it, Tim, because actually, teachers will find that their kids. Because teachers probably go into education, I'm guessing most of them, because they enjoy imparting knowledge and wisdom and inspiring a generation of kids to think about the world in a certain way. You're going to have more engaged kids when they've been fed properly, when they don't have blood sugar roller coasters in lesson, when they're going to be moody, they're going to be more attentive and more switched on to what you're trying to teach them. So I actually think there are benefits. The same goes for workplaces. If they helped encourage, no one wants to be able to, no one wants their employer to tell them what to eat, but there are ways to sort of not make it easy to eat junk, right? I think that's where I come down on it a little bit. But Tim, right, you mentioned before, if we go back to your personalized nutrition studies, so I can't stop thinking about what you said before, that if you snack, or in some patients, if they snack before a meal, it changes their metabolic response to that meal. So I wonder if we could just dive into that a little bit. So let's say you're going to have your dinner at 6 p.m., but at 4:30 p.m. you have, I don't know, a piece of cake, with a cup of tea. How might that impact the same meal that someone has at 6 p.m. if they've not had that cake?
Well, it's going to vary for different people, because I've told you there's this unique response. But we're generally seeing a higher insulin and glucose peak.
If they've snacked before. So there'd be more stress on the body having snacked than if they hadn't eaten at all. It will depend on the time of day and other things like this, because again, it's not a simple, black and white type relationship. Sure.
But everything that you do before you have whatever it is you're eating has a role in that response to that meal. And so for most people who have anything to eat before that time that will induce a sugar surge will cause an even bigger one in the subsequent meal. Okay, so this is why once you start thinking of food in a different way as a chemical reaction in your body, you realize that you don't want to have these big sugar peaks, these fat peaks after food. You want to, you accept some of them, but you want to balance it for your body so that your body's not overreacting all the time and in a sort of stressed, inflamed state, which is what we think is happening for people on very bad diets. They're just constantly stressing the body, the insulin's being pumped up, inflammation levels go up, vessels start getting inflamed, long-term stress equals weight gain and concentration problems and energy problems. So getting a good night's sleep, having a good rest between meals, trying to work out whether you should be eating your food early in the morning or late at night, depending on your particular circadian rhythm. All these things are important, but absolutely we should be eating less meals. We should be having 2 decent meals a day, rather than this standard 6, which we are now being told it is still the right way to eat. Oh, and buy the, just happen to be these cheap snack foods you can buy that parents are told is good for their children, and it's just complete nonsense. We have to break that cycle, break it down again, and start, people experimenting and getting people used to, and kids particularly, you imagine a child that's used to eating 6 or 7 times a day. How do they cope with a fast? After 2 hours, they're conditioned to start looking for something else to eat. Whereas the French kid, the Spanish kid, the Italian kid, they'll be patient. They'll wait, and they'll wait for some decent food. And I think that's the other thing. It's this conditioning that's maybe just as bad as this metabolic problem. So,
and I think that the uncomfortable truth for many of us as parents is that our behavior can also condition our own kids, right? So what they see us doing, and if we've, let's say, picked up habits that maybe ideally we would change, but we haven't, yet our kids are around us and seeing it, they're also going to pick up that as well. And I think, I say that as a reminder to myself, just be careful how much you snack. It's not like looking down on anyone. It's purely understanding that we're all susceptible.
But these religious, I'm a big fan of, fasting, and virtually every religion has had fasting in there as a way of training, as a sort of health thing and bonding the community together. But I think it's a great training for kids to be able to fast for a period of time, to realize that you're not going to die if you don't eat, and you just wait until the next day or, when the sun goes down or whatever it is. And it's very sad that it's slowly being lost, and certainly in the Christian world, it's virtually lost. And it's only the other religions that do it. But bringing back, some non-religious fast day for the whole family might be a fun thing that everyone should do. With a big feast at the end to celebrate.
Yeah, you're right. This sort of feast-famine type pattern that we've no doubt had in evolution. How can we bring that back? When you say you're a fan of fasting, what do you mean by fasting? Because if I don't clarify this, we'll get a ton of questions afterwards. What do you mean by fasting? Are you talking about intermittent fasting, time restricted eating, how many hours? All those questions will come up. So I'd love to know, what does Professor Tim Spector think of fasting?
Well, firstly, everything in moderation. So I'm not someone who believes in multiple day fasting. I've never fasted for more than 24 hours, and I wouldn't recommend it. But I do think, just in general principle, the idea of going on a fast psychologically is really important, so that you remember what hunger is really like, and you remember that you can distract yourself from hunger, and that also you can paint a nice picture of having this enormous breakfast the next day, and amazingly you can fall asleep and get around it. So until I started doing it, I didn't believe that was sort of possible. I thought, I'm too weak, I'm not going to be able to do that. But so just the principle of any fast, it's quite just a thing to do for your own psychological well-being, I think, to realize that we've got this we've got these chemicals in our brain and they're telling us to do this, but you can switch them off, you can divert them. When you don't have to, it's fine. And most of us will come across some medical thing that we have to fast, but we're usually just distracted by that medical thing that we do it. And that's interesting that that's quite easy. But when you do it voluntarily, it's somewhat harder. So the principle is I like it. I was a big fan of intermittent fasting when it first came out, because it allowed you to eat less food, but not in a restricted way. So you could pick what the food was you were going to eat and just had only a quarter of the amount on that day. And I don't think it was shown to be better than any other diets, but you could stay on it for longer because you had the variety. You could change it all. It wasn't dull. It didn't interfere with anything else. And
when you say intermittent fasting, Tim, would you mind just elaborating on what that means exactly?
Okay, so intermittent fasting, I'm talking about things like the 5-2 diet. So you would have 2 days during the week, not consecutive, where you would have 25% of your normal calories, and or some people would have less, but it would be the idea that you'd really reduce it down. Maybe just have an apple and a bit of clear soup and something in the evening. I always had a glass of red wine as a treat in the evening, but which used up most of my allowance. And then the next day you could compensate, do whatever you liked, really. So that it was and you could do that for 2 days a week. And most people found they did lose weight, or as a way of controlling weight, that didn't give you the same rebound that you got with calorie counting or doing anything like that. Now, like all things, it turns out to be not as amazing as we thought, but it did allow a lot of people to carry on doing it for years. And I do know people who have been doing it for years, and every now and again they just say, okay, I'll just have a hungry day and do that. And to my mind, because they're not changing the food they eat, it can still be healthy. I like that. It's not like they're having something out of a can or a artificial milkshake or a low-cal product. They're not going and saying, I'm going to get 0 calorie this and that. You can have exactly normal natural foods. But I think what is interesting at the moment is time-restricted feeding, which is a lot in the news at the moment, and has a lot of animal data supporting it, but so far hasn't lived up to expectations in the clinical trials, interestingly. So there have been a couple of trials recently where it hasn't shown to be as dramatic as you would expect from the animal studies. And it could be that, again, this individuality, those trials always look at the averages.
Yeah.
And it could be that some people would benefit from a different time scale. For some people it isn't enough. Some people might be too much. And so I would still advise everybody to give it a go. And particularly this idea of whether you're a morning person or an evening person. In our studies, when we gave identical muffins to people every 3 hours or every 4 hours across the day, most people's metabolic peaks, these stress peaks I was telling you about, got less during the day. So the other way, they went up during the day. So 3 out of 4 people got worse during the day with the same food. 1 in 4 people actually got better. So, and I was one of them. So it suggests that for some people, eating later in the day would be better than eating early in the day. So some people are morning people, and like the dogma tells us, you metabolize better your carbohydrates in the morning, you break it down quicker, you get less of a sugar peak eating the identical food. And we compared lots of people doing this, but 1 in 4 people, it's the opposite.
Wow.
So some people are better off not having a large breakfast, also either skipping breakfast and having a lunch and a big evening meal, like most people in the Mediterranean. Those people will do better. So again, it's all about self-experimentation. There isn't one size fits all, and there's many complicated bits go into food.
Yeah.
And it's necessary to maybe deconstruct it all without losing the fun bits of eating.
Yeah.
Because there is this huge social side that's really important, mustn't lose sight of. But let's not stop eating breakfast just because everyone says you have to eat breakfast. And they say, well, Mummy, I'm not hungry. Well, try it for a week without breakfast and see.
Yeah.
It's not going to kill them. And if it doesn't work out, you change your mind. But generally, humans are pretty good at, if you listen to your body, it will tell you. Most people are not starving when they wake up in the morning. You don't wake up at 7:30 and say, oh my God, I've got to eat something, And so and some people, they don't get any feeling of hunger until, maybe 11, 12 o'clock.
I think energy is a big one. It's in some ways the currency of life, isn't it? We all know what it feels like when we've got low energy. We don't want to do anything. Our food choices are affected. We don't want to cook something fresh. We take the quick and easy option. Energy is everything, I think. And I would argue that if there's one thing we want to improve, certainly in my experience, more than anything else, it's energy, because all our decision making, all our behaviors, I find, are so much better when we've got energy. But as you know, so many people are struggling with that. Given that it's personalized, and I know you've set me a Zoe kit and I still haven't done it, week on Monday, I will be doing it. So when you come on the podcast next time, when your next book is out, which I'm really excited about, we'll definitely talk about how I found it and what results I got. Given that it's personalized, are there some general trends that are applicable to people who haven't done it yet, who are like, okay, I get it's personalized, but is there anything I can learn from what you have learned so far?
Yeah, I think if I tried to say, well, what have I learned without knowing what my results were, just look at other people's results, is that there's a proportion of people that are really sensitive to carbohydrates, and there's a proportion that aren't. And it's hard to tell. Obviously, if you've got a lot of perhaps diabetes in the family, you might suspect that that's true.
Is that refined carbohydrates and whole food carbohydrates?
Yes.
Yeah.
It is. The more refined, the worse. But it's a spectrum. There isn't an absolute cutoff.
No. But as you expand there, just to share my own experience, because I have used the CGM, continuous glucose monitor, a couple of times. I don't use one regularly. But I did early on in the year, and I've got one on at the moment. And last week over dinner, it was a pretty healthy meal, and I think the carb with it was sweet potato mash that my wife had made. Oh man, I can't remember what it went up to, but it was a big rise with my blood sugar about an hour, maybe an hour and a half after the meal, which really surprised me. And I found with other things, like if it's a few boiled potatoes or a small amount of white rice, actually it doesn't anywhere near to the same degree. Now, there's a few other things I need to tweak and I need to replicate with different foods just to see which one it was. But sweet potatoes are considered, a healthy carb, a whole food carb. Sure, it was mashed, so that was, that's changed it somewhat. But that was really interesting for me, because I may have continued eating that, but that will definitely make me think again about how much do I want to have this if it's going to push my sugar that high. So that, I guess, speaks to what you're saying and what you're finding with people. Some people are exquisitely sensitive to carbs, even whole food ones.
And there's different carbs. So, there will be some things that, there's a difference between pasta and rice and bread for some people. And understand there's a huge difference, within those ranges. And people will say, okay, well, porridge is healthy, isn't it? Most people tell me oats, that's healthy. But, for me, they're not. But, I tried 3 or 4 different types of oat porridge. And what that tells you is the more refined, the more ground up, the more it's been factory made, and the quicker it is to make, the higher my sugar peaks go.
Yeah. So
as a general rule, if you pick things that are less refined, less processed, and take longer to cook, it's because their outer coating is that energy is stored much and it's harder to get out. So So steel cut oats, things you have to, cook overnight, don't have half the sugar peak of the identical, Quaker Oats instant meal, which for me is just like pure sugar. So I think it's
so
telling you
hearing
that
porridge is healthy doesn't mean anything.
No.
For who? Sorry to interrupt. If you are enjoying this content, there's loads more just like it on my channel. So please do take a moment to press subscribe, hit the notification bell, and now back to the conversation.
And it's the structure of food. It's because you've broken down that oat, it can be in its whole form. You can have it, cut. You can have it rolled, or you can have it so finely powdered and air dried that sugar just rushes out, and haven't got any fiber. So understanding the differences between foods, I think, is a really important lesson, so that we mustn't over categorize again. Reduce everything to saying this is good, this is bad. Within each category, there are good and bad foods that we all need to learn about. It's like hummus and chickpeas, or almonds and ground almonds. They have totally different amounts of things in them when the structure changes.
Given how much data we can learn about ourselves through continuous sugar monitors, are we not getting to the point where it's almost in every single person's best interest to at least do a 2-week trial with one of them, to at least say, oh man, I'm having that every day, maybe I shouldn't be having that? Obviously, you've got to be careful with people's relationships with food, and food is so much more than just the blood sugar response, isn't it? But I don't know, have you got any comments on those things?
I think people can get obsessed with blood sugar monitors, and there are people, who get obsessed about all kinds of things about food, and reducing it to purely a sugar peak is not the right answer, because you can go down completely the wrong direction, and just by adding double cream to everything, you can dampen down the sugar response, but it doesn't mean that eating a bucket full of double cream every day is good for you. So I think you've got to see it in that holistic light of all the things we talked about, and your fat response. Some people can cope with a lot of fat, other people can't. And there are good fats and bad fats as well. So it's just part of the equation. But I think it does give people like an insight into, the fact that something we shouldn't necessarily need. Orange juice actually is not a health food. And it's, it should be in the alcohol category or something like that you take. It's not good for anybody, really. Which, if everyone did have a glucose monitor on every time they had a glass of orange juice, they would see. It's, the same as a Coca-Cola. And it would just put them in the same sort of category. And so you'd say, well, okay, that should go in the same. So it would change people's ideas of things. And I think, there will be a watch soon that I think probably within 5 years that does the same as a glucose monitor. And once that happens, everyone, like counting steps and things, they'll probably want it. But I think we have to be very careful. We don't then make the same mistakes of reductionism that we've made up to now, because humans love to make it simple, and nutrition of food is anything but simple.
Yeah. I mean, I was playing devil's advocate a bit, asking should everyone have one, because my concern with trackers in general, which is why I've used this twice. So I had 2 weeks at the start of the year. I'm in a 2-week cycle now. I've said this before on the show, but I always notice this with blood pressure monitors with patients. People say, should I get one? Should I get a home blood pressure monitor? And, it would depend, on some patients would. And then it was pretty much a 50-50 split. For some people, it was awesome. They'd check it once a week or twice a week. They wouldn't stress about it. They'd use it as a way of keeping them on track with their lifestyle changes. The other 50% would check 3-4 times a day. Anytime it was slightly up, they'd recheck it. They'd get anxious. They'd come back in. That would drive their blood pressure up even more. And I thought, wow, the same tool can be helpful or problematic depending, in some ways, on the personality type, depending on who that person was. And I suspect, because there's tracking everything now. There's sleep trackers, there's step trackers, there's blood sugar trackers. And I think we've just got to be careful, as you say. I think a blood sugar tracker for 2 weeks for anyone is you bring stuff that you don't know about that's hidden inside you, you bring it into the light. Like if you suddenly see your glass of orange juice that you think, because of all the packaging, it's got vitamin C in and all the things the packet says is helpful for you, and you see yourself going to 10 or 11 on, way over the diabetic range, you might think twice about having that, several times a week. And if all that does for you is help you realize, or maybe someone who has porridge every day and they realize, wait a minute, porridge is spiking my blood sugar massively. It's going to, do this for 5 years. I'm going to end up type 2 diabetic.
Yeah.
Then that has value because they can then use that and they don't have to check it all year. They can move on. Or maybe they do it, I don't know, maybe it's the sort of thing in the future they'll do once a year or once every 6 months. They go, oh, this is what's happening at the moment. Okay, I'm going to make some changes. I'm not going to look. I'm going to work on my gut microbiome. And then 6 months later, I'm going to put it back on again just to see. I think that's how I'm going to be using this. Just because I think I could also potentially, because of my personality type, I think I could run the risk of getting obsessed, which is why I'm very cautious about trackers.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I don't see this is a permanent feature on the human body.
No.
I think it'd be a real mistake. We'd be creating super neuroses, and you can artificially,
you can cheat it, can't you?
You can cheat the system,
Yeah.
and again, forget the point of it, which is getting quality food into your gut microbes. So I think doing it once in a programmed way, it's not actually that easy to do it yourself. And I think,
oh, that's interesting.
We've found, I've done several times. I've told people, oh, for radio programs, do it and we'll discuss it. If unless you've got clear guidance on what to do, what to look at, what the peaks are, when to measure it, you get the wrong impression about things.
Yeah,
and,
which can be even more problematic.
Yeah, you measure the wrong time after eating your bread. You miss the peak. You don't know what's going on. You can't compare it to anyone else. You get the wrong impression. So I think in a standardized way, doing it, but I wouldn't do it more than once a year, I don't think.
Yeah.
And I've found that even though I've used maybe 20 times or so, I'm not obsessional about these things, and I do often forget I've got it on. I sort of know how I'm going to respond to things now.
Yeah.
And so you have that early lesson, which is really good, gives you a real sort of jolt about, gosh, I was wrong about food. I was wrong about my breakfast. I'm going to educate myself more. That's what I think we should be aiming for, which comes back to this, the idea we were, what is good food? How do we tell? And for people without a glucose monitor, 1 in 4 people do feel energy levels, and I think
what they feel them going down.
Down, yes, but some people don't. And
you mean when their blood sugar spikes and crashes? Some people get a low energy, but others don't at that time.
Well, or they're not particularly observant enough to notice it unless they're being prompted. And so I think this is perhaps one thing we should be promoting is that, if you're doing self-experiments and you haven't got the money to pay for these things, which are still not in everyone's reach, how to listen to your body more to say, well, am I hungry? What's my energy level like? And just sort of make a note or, keep a diary of things is the other way to do this. And there are a certain portion of people who can judge pretty well what foods are. But the nice thing about our study was people were blind to it.
Yeah.
They didn't know their results. And so when we saw these peaks and troughs, which 1 in 4 people had really big ones, and they didn't know why they were feeling tired. They just reported they were tired on the app. And I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. You mentioned breakfast a few times. You often appear in the media with some...
I'm Mr. Breakfast.
Yeah, some pretty crazy headlines. Now, I've been around in media enough to know not to trust the headline. But skipping breakfast potentially being good for us is something that's often attributed to you. Now, can you expand? What is your view on breakfast? And I guess the kind of context here is that for many years, people have said breakfast is the most important meal of the day.
They have, and that's really where I came into it, and really writing the diet myth. My idea was to look at the data and challenge some of these myths, which I thought it was a long-standing one. And strangely, it's still there. If you go to the NHS 8 healthy eating tips, it's still there. despite all the evidence saying that there is no evidence that skipping breakfast is bad for you. So that's the first. Well, the countless studies now show it is not bad for you. It doesn't cause metabolic problems. It doesn't cause diabetes or you to gain weight, or even it doesn't cause kids to perform badly at school, which was the other worry that was planted by the food companies in people's minds. Some studies have shown that it actually can induce some weight loss. Now, that's not totally consistent, but it is certainly going in that direction. When you combine all the studies together, that's what you show. But increasingly, the idea that this might be true is supported by science, showing that it may not be the breakfast itself, but just the gap you're leaving overnight. And this whole question of not just what we eat, but how we eat is becoming more and more important. And everyone's heard about intermittent fasting, but the new thing that all the nutritional scientists are talking about is restricted time eating, which I'm sure you've talked about many times. But the finding about skipping breakfast was in a way a pointer to that actually we've been missing this whole idea that the idea of we should be eating little and often throughout the day has actually been the wrong advice, and that we should be compressing our meal times. Perhaps doesn't matter whether it's 2 or 3 meals, but they should be in a shorter time frame. And so the sweet point seems to be somewhere between, in about 10 hours of eating and 14 hours of not eating. And that might be the reason that skipping breakfast for most people, not everybody, and again, I think there's quite a bit of individuality here. There are some people who generally feel hungry when they wake up and feel tired if they don't have some breakfast, but I would say the majority of people don't, and it's just a cultural or a sort of lifestyle reason to get some food in you when you're in your home comfy environment. But increasingly, I've started myself to either skip breakfast or have it at 11 o'clock. And particularly post-COVID, people are working at home now. They are in much more control of their meal times, and it's a great time to start. So that's a bit of practical advice that everyone can do. Either try skipping it and see how you feel, and if that doesn't feel right, or you still enjoy breakfast with its ability to have your yogurt and your nuts and seeds, which would be if I missed out on that, would be problematic. Have it later, and have it as either as a brunch or just a couple of hours before you have your other meal.
I think it's super helpful. And as you say, the problem with these cultural fixed ideas are that often people are not paying attention. They're not feeling hungry, but they think I should have breakfast because I keep hearing that. And the scientists say it's important to have it. And the problem is it's very hard to say breakfast good or bad because it depends. Number one, what do you mean by breakfast, right? What time is it? Is it at 6 a.m.? Is it at 11 a.m.? It also depends on the rest of your life. Do you enjoy a big meal with your family at 9 p.m., right? Maybe people are working late and actually that's the way that they connect at that point or whatever. In which case, at 7 a.m. you may not be hungry. Whereas if you eat, like I try and eat with my kids at, when I can, around work, about 5, half 5. Like I genuinely feel at my best when I'm doing something like, I'd say an 8 a.m. till 6 p.m. or a 9 a.m. till 6 p.m. eating window, even sometimes a 10 till 6, like an 8-hour eating window. I feel great. I don't feel hungry before. I don't feel hungry afterwards. I sleep like a baby. And it works for me, my job and my lifestyle.
At this point in time.
At this point in time, exactly. So therefore, these studies, and I say with all this public health advice, I'd encourage people to, think a little bit, take a bit of agency over themselves, use what you're saying or what I'm saying or what they hear, but also try and filter it and apply it in the context of your own life. I think that's important, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's very different. If you've got young kids, you're going to have a different time scale than if you're, grandparents and you've got, the time is in you're retired and you've got, you can plan everything yourself. So
Because there's a social aspect to food, of course.
yeah, and we mustn't forget that. Really important that people don't obsess about.
Yeah.
I do worry that, and certainly looking at some of the Zoe customers in the US, it's about 30% are already on restricted time eating when they're coming into the program. So it's huge in the US compared to the UK. But some people might get so obsessed about their eating times that they forget the healthy aspect of the food they have to eat and the enjoyment and the social aspect.
Yeah.
And I think, again, for people who are a bit, obsessional on it, you have to make it not so extreme. And I think that's the danger of people trying to outdo each other and say, oh, I can only need to eat in 4-hour window and I'm fine. And it's just not, you wouldn't get people in Italy or Spain or France who enjoy the long meals and the socializing doing that. And they're the ones who live longest and, are healthier. So we have to remember that.
Some of those countries, of course, are having later breakfasts, aren't they? Or they're sort of technically skipping the breakfast that we might have in the UK, certainly at that time.
Yeah, well, I work in Spain a lot, and they usually don't finish eating till 10 p.m., sometimes 11. But you rarely see anybody having breakfast before 11. If they do, or they don't bother, it's just a coffee.
Yeah.
So I think there's different
fascinating,
cultural
isn't it?
ways to it. We've just assumed that everyone has the same habits in different countries, but there's a north-south divide in times of people eating in Europe. But in the south, it's not like they're at 7 a.m. eating breakfast.
Yeah.
And I think the ones who tend to eat earlier tend to have more earlier breakfast. But I think it's very personal. And
It is.
but most people I speak to, when you say, well, the first thing you wake up, and you've had a cup of tea or coffee, most people just don't feel really hungry. It's not like that's the first thing on your mind
Yeah.
if you had a choice of things to do,
Yeah. Just to finish off this conversation, Tim, we've mentioned polyphenols and fermented foods. We didn't go into that much detail on either one. Could we just briefly go through what are polyphenols? Why should people think about getting more of them in? How can they do that? And then potentially the same for fermented foods as well.
So polyphenols used to be called antioxidants, and they are a group of well over 1,000 different chemicals that are in plants, in all plants to different levels. And they're defense chemicals that plants use to defend themselves against sun or predators. And they are often, when you eat them, have a slightly bitter taste, can cause astringency, just like if you have a really old red wine, it gives you that taste on the tongue. That's because the skin of the grape has a lot of these polyphenols in it. And they are in brightly colored foods, they're in slightly bitter foods, and they're in complex foods. And so they're in things like coffee, dark chocolate, red wine, extra virgin olive oil, nuts, seeds, berries particularly. So these are all health foods. And these polyphenols we now know are useful for us because they feed our microbes, and those microbes then convert them into other healthy chemicals. We can't really use them ourselves. So it's quite interesting. They really are like specific fish food that we're eating. Wow. That provides us then these chemicals then get back into our bloodstream and dampen down inflammation and keep us healthy. So that's really important. And there's big differences between foods, like the choice of a cooking oil between, a highly refined vegetable oil and an extra virgin olive oil is massive.
Can you see that in Zoe as well?
Well, it's reflected in the scores.
Yeah.
So we would give a different score to vegetable oil than we would for extra virgin olive oil, both depending on the quality of the fats, but also its effect on your gut microbes. So all of the scores do reflect polyphenols and the fermentation, which is the next thing we're talking about, which also affects the gut. So polyphenols really important, and but you've got to understand a bit more about the food. So chocolate, for example, all chocolate has some polyphenols in it, but it's only in the cocoa part of it, not the the artificial bits and not the sugar and not the milk.
Which is why the dark chocolate is
Dark
the
chocolate
preferred
is
option.
packed with it. Milk chocolate has very little and is overridden by the sugar. So again, it's all about the quality and looking at the labels and seeing what's on the food. And difference between picking a really brightly coloured lettuce or an iceberg lettuce is massive in terms of the difference of the polyphenol. So the colour of the leaves and the way the lettuce is gives you a different indication of how many polyphenols.
So what are we
it's got.
looking for when we're picking our lettuce?
You're looking for one with loose leaves that is brightly coloured, often different colours, reds, and that's true for a lot of foods. So generally, it's a bit like the berry. The brightly coloured berries have more of these things than the other ones do. So this is we're just understanding this sort of science. So some of the things we thought were good for us aren't, and this is another thing to look out for. So polyphenols are really good. Fermented foods are anything that has live microbes in it. So it's like probiotics naturally occurring in food. So by the time you're eating it, it's actually got live microbes that can still replicate and produce chemicals. And so everyone knows yogurt has that, but kefir has several times more microbes than yogurt, and it's a thinner version of it. And then you've got kombucha, which is fermented tea, which is becoming more popular, which has even more than kefir in it and has different fungi and yeasts. So often up to 30 different microbes you can find in a proper kombucha. And you've got then sauerkraut used in Central and Eastern Europe, which is fermented cabbage. And of course, going one level above that, you've got kimchi.
One level above that in terms of the number of microbes?
Number of microbes and diversity, because you've also got, as well as cabbage, you've got garlic, you've got chilies, you've got onions and other peppers and things. So the more complex it is, often the greater the richness of the
And that's super
microbes.
helpful, because sauerkraut is known to be for people who are, who read about gut health, they know that sauerkraut is one of those fermented foods that's really helpful. But this idea that you can upgrade to kimchi because it's not just cabbage, it's like going back to the very start of this conversation, the diversity, it's got more plant foods in it. Therefore, it's going to, feed more and more microbes. That's super helpful, I think.
Yeah, and then you move on to if you like Japanese food, of course, anything with miso in it is really important, because miso is fermented soy, and so there's plenty of fermented soy dishes that you can get as well, that tempeh and other ones like this. So fermented food is really big. Be careful you don't buy ones with vinegar in it that are killed, and try and smell that when you open it. Check it hasn't got vinegar in it, and you can usually tell by the smell if it's live or not. And having a small amount every day is what I try and do. There's no point in having a feast once a week. We know that these things die out, so for practical reasons, try and have a small shot of one or two of these every day. And that's why, if you have it at home in your fridge, you're near for breakfast or your first meal, you've got it, or you have it, at night when you come back.
I love that. That reminds me of what I talk about a lot, which is like a lot of people who listen to the show know that I do a 5-minute strength workout every morning whilst my coffee's brewing. It's a habit that I've stacked onto that, so I never miss it, because I never miss my coffee. So I never miss that little 5-minute workout every morning. And I always say that I found that little regularly actually has a very powerful effect on the body, no matter what habit it is, no matter what behavior we're trying to bring in. And I guess bringing that into gut health as well, a little bit every day with a fermented food is better than binging on the whole jar maybe on a Sunday when you have more time, something like that.
Yeah, and I've changed, and cheese is the other thing, of course, which we forget is fermented if it's real cheese. But, we're not talking about Kraft slices. We're talking that, cheese that doesn't have to be unpasteurized, although that helps because you do get extra microbes if it's raw milk cheese. But most cheeses are good. The ones with blue lines and fungus on them have even more microbes. And just having a small amount of that every day, it's absolutely healthy. There's a myth that cheese is bad for your heart and things. Absolutely no evidence that's true. A small regular amount of that and instead of a pickle that might be high in sugars and salt, a traditional English pickle, try sauerkraut or kimchi with it. And I think increasingly you can just build this into your daily diet, so you are having these things regularly, and you just have something in the fridge you just pop on your plate as an extra. And I think that's what I found, is having the ingredients ready around you, so you can just add them, whether it's the original seed mix or it's the kimchi pot.
Make it easy.
You just grab it and you stick it in, and or just after your coffee, you have if you're in a hurry, you just have a shot glass of your kefir or your kombucha, and you're sorted. So that's fermented foods, and I think everyone needs to learn about them. Other countries have been doing it for centuries, and we've just lost out.
Just before we finish off, Tim, I think it's an important point to make, that something I'm observing a lot is that a lot of people, or certainly, that there's a significant amount of people who struggle to increase the amount of plants in their diet. They get symptoms, they get bloating, they don't feel good. And you will have seen this online, as I have, that there is a growing movement towards more and more severe diets, more and more restricted diets. Now, a lot of people follow these days what is being called a carnivore diet, which is, all meat or predominantly meat with very few other things in it. And I know patients actually, and I know people who are thriving on these diets compared to how they felt before. A lot of people will say, my joint pain's gone. I've got more energy. My skin's better. So therefore, you can see from their perspective that they're feeling better compared to where they were before. Yet they're now hearing someone as respected as yourself talk about all the benefits of plant foods for the gut microbiome. And I think a lot of these people feel stuck between a rock and a hard place. They want to apply what they're learning, but they also know that they feel better on quite a wildly different diet. Have you come across this, and do you have any kind of thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I've had people write to me saying, I've been on a carnivore diet for 2 years and I feel great. I don't understand what you're on about, and I say, well, everyone is different. You could have a unique set of gut microbes that seem to cope with this. But my worry is that although initially changing from, say, a high carb diet or an ultra processed food diet to carnivore diet, you will feel better in a number of ways. Long term, I worry that we are omnivores, and our gut microbe diversity does depend on giving them enough to feed. If you're only eating meat, you're going to have a very limited range of gut microbes to produce all these chemicals and vitamins for you. So I would just urge those people, not to give up meat, but to start introducing small amounts of regular different plants. It doesn't have to be huge quantities, but it doesn't have to be starchy ones either. It could just be, the leafy green ones, which there is a variety. Certainly nuts and seeds and mushrooms are, also good. We haven't talked about mushrooms, but no. The last few years, I've become a real big fan, of this is an amazing source of protein and nutrition that I think is, probably going to end up saving the planet as we move forward. But, there are lots of nuances, but there isn't one size fits all. And there may be people out there who don't need 30 plants a week. I'm not saying it is absolute rule. I'd love to do some studies on these people. So it'd be fantastic if some carnivore dieters did the Zoe study and we could look at their gut microbes.
Well, I have someone who someone just for you, actually, someone who is literally thriving and has tried vegan diets before, has tried low carbs, and literally finds that going full carnivore. And I know this lady super well, and she is thriving, high energy, high cognition, can work all day, can run marathons. I'm like, there's something going on here where she is thriving on this diet. And so I'd love to know. So I'm actually going to talk to her and put her in touch.
Well,
because that would be interesting, wouldn't it? What's actually going on in the microbiome?
Yeah, well, I mean, hopefully in 5 years we'll be looking back at this and say, well, we didn't know much, did we? Because
I'm sure we will.
Science is exciting and it's always changing. And, our views, we found a year ago this microbe blastocystis, which is in 1 in 4 British people have this parasite. It's not a microbe, it's a parasite that a few years ago you'd have had to go to the tropical medicine place and they'd have given you powerful antibiotics to get rid of it because they said, that will give you traveler's diarrhea. Now we know that it's associated with good health and lower fat levels.
Isn't it associated with lower autoimmune risk as well, potentially?
Yes, it dampens down inflammation, visceral fat, and 1 in 4 Britons have it. We've discovered only 1 in 20 Americans have it.
Wow.
But it's in 100% of all hunter-gatherers, 100% of all Indians that have been studied, of all developing countries. This is our normal state to have this parasite. So we still know so little about what's going on that who knows, there could be hidden fungi or other parasites inside our body that love meat and can produce sorts of chemicals. I'm not ruling it out.
Yeah.
I'm just saying on average, do be careful because you might get great short-term benefits, but don't wipe out your microbes because it's really hard to get them back.
There's quite a bit of research out there. And again, these are all averages that people saying eating the bulk of your calories in the first half of the day seems to have a better impact on, sort of weight than actually if you have the bulk of the calories in the second half of the day. Now, of course, these are just averages. And I think, to be clear, I don't think they were saying it has to be a breakfast. It could even be breakfast is meal 1, right? So meal 1 can be at any time. I think even if it was at 10:30 and people were eating most of their food by 4:30, I've seen I think at least 3 trials. And one of them was a Spanish one actually suggesting that actually there's a positive impact. Now, I get that's not the case for everyone.
And it's not the case for people who are older as well. We showed in our studies that there's an age effect. Right. So all these studies generally done on students in nutrition departments, right? So they're generally in their 20s. But increasingly as you get older, these patterns shift and these circadian patterns, this morning predominance gets lost. And so it's much weaker when you get over 50.
Is it really? Yeah. That's super interesting. And I think really for me that almost the work you're doing, in some ways it makes all previous studies redundant in some way, because if they haven't taken into account individual variation, then it's very hard to draw, we can draw an average conclusion, but then as you say, for that individual, it's like, well, the trial says that, but that ain't working for me.
And you need to look at the trial in real detail and say, okay, these are 20-year-old Americans or whatever. Am I, as a 40-year-old, non-American in another country, is this really appropriate for me? Why don't they show a wider range of individuals, ages? Realize that it's far more complex than they're showing, and that you need to do your own experiment in some way. And hopefully we will soon be able to do that. These
with everyone having their own monitor?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, obviously, the company I'm working with, Zoe, launched a couple of weeks ago the product in the US. So you can, for a few $100s, buy the product in the US, do 4 weeks of testing in a way, get your own scores, get your own report, and then go and then see how you get on just by using an app that tells you what your scores are, and then you work out, does that, how do I feel on that? And you can actually do your own proof, which is a faster way than spending 6 months trying to do it yourself. But I think the general principle is that these devices, these tests, the microbiome testing, all these things that input into these predictions are going to get much cheaper, much more available. And we're all going to be using an app, I think, that's personalized for us, within 5 or 10 years.
Wow.
I just think it's the most only logical way to deal with a complex problem, because, I've just given you a little snapshot of how complicated these things are about just eating one meal. But if this is reduced by some algorithm to tell you your score is this, you can then make some lifestyle choices based on that. And then, have a much, do 2 weeks of that and see, does that work for you or not?
I think that the real beauty of doing it individually is that you're really empowered to make a change when you see it on yourself, right? When it's not someone else's data. I nearly got a blood sugar monitor at the start of the summer, and I think I just got busy with the book edits, which frankly took me all summer. I thought, I'll get that in, and then I'll play around with and seeing, what happens to my blood sugar after certain meals. So I didn't get that, but I did get the sleep tracking device, which I think is certainly, from what I can tell, one of the best ones out there. And what's really interesting for me is that if I eat close to my bedtime, within 2 hours of bedtime, it takes a lot longer for my heart rate to drop at night. And I can see that in real time when I've played around with it. And that affects, your readiness score the next day and how much you've recovered. And it affects, certainly for me, my levels of deep sleep. So when I see that consistently and play around with it, I'm like, okay, I know that is not suiting me. So I've literally changed that. So I won't eat now. Very rarely will I eat within 2 or 3 hours of bed. It's very much, even if I get that pang at 9:30, I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to do it. And that, the feeling goes, because half the time you're not really hungry. It's just you're a bit bored and you just want something in your mouth. But I kind of see the same thing with blood sugar monitoring, right? It must be when you see it for yourself, you're then empowered to make that change. Have you seen anything, or have you done any work yet within the data about eating close to bedtime? Because I'm guessing in Spain, yes, they eat late, but I think they go to bed later as well, don't they?
Yeah, everything's later. So it's like jet lag. You just sort of, they never go to bed before 1. So
So they may still not be eating for 2 hours before bed, potentially.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they wouldn't go to bed straight after eating, no.
Yeah.
So, and they wouldn't eat in the morning, so they'd have a longer, because I mean, you're looking at it just from one point of time, whereas actually you might say, well, actually, what about your metabolism at lunchtime, after you've had that? I mean, it's all related.
Yeah.
And what do you have the day before? And should you be exercising before or after meals? How does that change your metabolism?
But that's only blood sugar, though, isn't it? Because you guys are measuring 3 things: blood sugar, triglycerides in the blood, and also, what was the other thing you're measuring? Inflammation. So you're measuring 3 things. Can you get a lot of that from just the blood sugar? Because a lot of self-experimenters are getting the blood sugar testing and doing that, but you obviously in your testing are doing it a lot more. There's 2 more parameters. So what can we take from that?
I mean, blood sugar alone certainly picks up things like having a real pre-diabetic tendency, knowing whether you really have a problem with carbs, the sugar dips, but it doesn't tell you whether you should be replacing everything with fats or not, because some people have problems with fats and they don't. The easiest way to get a good blood sugar reading is just to have fat. You just put butter and cream on everything and it wipes out the sugar response. So everything that's just based on sugar has always got that flaw that you're never quite sure whether you're doing yourself more harm or not, because you don't know what your 6-hour triglyceride is, whether those fats are going to be hanging around your body all overnight, causing inflammation, giving you heart disease, all these kind of things.
Yeah.
So I think it is important to do both, but you can certainly get a lot of insights, and I think just psychologically really important to suddenly, it's the instantaneous bit of the sugar that, on your phone, you can actually see things going up when you thought something was healthy. So I changed for a while to eating porridge for breakfast, oat. And there was this huge myth that oats were amazingly good for cholesterol and your heart, and particularly in the US, this massive campaign. And you have all these varieties. I tried about 4 or 5 different oats, and I felt really being healthy, but then I saw my sugar levels really high.
Wow.
Until I got to the steel cut stuff that you had to sort of boil overnight and was really thick, hard to digest. And then that was the only one that sort of worked. And you see these real life experiments for yourself. And then I gave a monitor to my wife, and we're having the same meal, and you see her quite happily tucking into bread and toast with no sugar rises at all, and me, all over the place. So those sort of little insights will stay with you forever.
Yeah.
Much more than reading an article in a paper. So I think this personalized thing is a real way to elicit change.
Yeah.
And you won't go back after that. I'll never look at bread the same way. And I just wish I'd had, eaten more pasta in the last 20 years than bread, because that's much better for me. But, kind of things that aren't necessarily intuitive.
Yeah. And did you say you can't get from the trial? And I remember reading that in the book about instant porridge oats versus steel cut oats. And again, it's sort of coming back to what you said before about, grandma probably wasn't giving us instant porridge oats. Well, it was the real deal. Tim, getting back to the book, because, I could talk to you for hours about all kinds of different things. The book really has got a beautiful structure. I think it's very actionable. You take on various myths and you walk us through the science, a bit of storytelling there, sort of really with a practical take home from that, which I really like. Obviously, we're not going to go through all of them now, given how long we've already been chatting for, but there's a few things. I think one of the myths was that fish is always good for you, and I quite liked that chapter. I wonder if you've got any insights on fish for people, because there is a feeling out there, isn't there, that fish is like a wonder food. What's your opinion on fish?
Well, I was a big fan of fish, and I'd been trying to force my son to eat fish all of his life, and then give him fish capsules, and which I only found years later he'd stuck onto the bottom of the in a drawer in the kitchen to rot very carefully. And it turns out that omega-3 fish oils don't pass muster when it comes to randomized trials. So the fish oil extract, which everyone thought was the important thing of fish, doesn't reduce heart disease, which is a shock to many people. And fish itself, it's another meat. People forget that fish is meat. It's just floating around in the water. And it's been given magical properties through maybe these blue zone areas and the Japanese eating fish, although they ate lots of other things. But a lot of the people who were centenarians never ate any fish in Sardinia and Greece. They just ate masses of goat and other things, greasy other animals. And the data really is pretty modest in terms of the benefits of fish. Average trials show 5 to 8% reduction in mortality, which, given observational studies, is not significant. And increasingly, fish is farmed. So majority of the fish we eat in the world now comes from a farm, not swimming around naturally. And so it's full of chemicals, it's full of often pesticides, antibiotics, full of microplastics now.
Yeah.
And if we did what we were told to, is all have 2 to 3 portions of fish a day, fish would very quickly go extinct, or we'd be having to produce so much grain and soya to feed the fish farms that they, would also run out of produce. So, I used to call myself pescatarian. I love fish, but it's massively overhyped. And I think we just need to stop the bullshit and realize that have it as a treat, get good quality stuff. But a lot of the fish we're eating now is either fake or very poor quality farm stuff that's ruining the environment. And so I think that's the sort of balancing message here.
Yeah.
And that the idea of these miracle foods is rubbish. And that's a really good example of a overhyped food that has no real basis other than the fact we haven't found anything wrong with it at the moment, apart from mercury and eating lots of plastic.
I mean, what about people who would say that fatty fish, like let's say it's not farmed, like wild salmon, for example, contains high levels of omega-3, which we know are helpful for brain development and function? I mean, what would you say to people who would sort of who would sort of pose that query?
I'd say absolutely go for occasional high quality fish when you can have it, but don't reduce it to a few chemicals. Something like fish has hundreds of different chemicals in it, and vitamins and nutrients. But we can't just take one thing from it and say that's really important, that's why I'm having it. In Scandinavia, it has vitamin D, so it helps some people with vitamin D deficiency through the winter. But it doesn't mean it's a miracle food. Yeah. It doesn't mean that we should, religiously bend over backwards like we have for every other spirulina or every other fad that comes along. That whether it's chia seeds or super berries or whatever it is. It should be part of this whole balanced idea of food. And I'm absolutely saying, do eat fish, but do it in a way that's environmentally aware. Go for the high quality, not the cheap fake stuff that's being produced in farms that's destroying a lot of the world. And don't believe all the hype. And that's just a really good example of how, we've said that red meat is bad, fish is really good. And of course, the devil's in the detail. High quality bits of both in small amounts, I believe, are absolutely fine.
It really strikes me that what you're advocating, using the very latest science, is actually a back to basics approach. It's kind of saying, eat food that's been around, that's kind of been around for a long time, that's kind of natural food, that's as close to nature as possible. Play around with it, figure out which ones work best for you, and then eat more of that. I don't mean to reduce down all the incredible work you're doing, but actually, I think that's a really empowering message. I mean, would you agree with that?
Yeah, with a caveat that I think what I believe in is diversity and range of foods.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons I don't like people saying fish is a wonder food is that some people have sort of fish twice a day, and means they don't get many of the other stuff because they're like the people who like carnivore diets, fill their plates with meat. There's no space for anything else. Or the obsessional vegan who just has 3 types of kale. Anyone who tries to reduce things down to a few superfoods is denying themselves the diversity of plants that is really at the core of what I think is good advice, that we need to be having a much bigger range of foods, both for taste, texture, the planet, but also for our gut microbes, because there's this key formula, which I do talk about in the book, that to get your maximum diversity of gut microbes, which gives you the greatest health for your immune system and your brain and all the chemicals they can produce, you should be having around 30 species of plant a week. And so as long as you stick to that, that can be back to basics, but keep it diverse. Do not get, diverted down some narrow tunnel of propaganda or religious fanaticism about a particular range of foods, or this is super this or super that, or I'm only going for these B vitamins, or I'm only doing this. This reductionist nonsense is, the new technology is making mockery of that. We're incredibly complicated chemical factories. Our microbes are chemical factories. We've got 20,000 genes, 26,000 different chemicals in food. We're producing, we have thousands of species producing, we'd have thousands of genes, and all of these are interacting. And so all our knowledge so far has been so reductionist, picking one vitamin, one nutrient, one of this. And everyone thinks they're an expert because, do you realize that, how much phosphate is in a carrot? And, and people often catching me out because I've got no clue about, because I've got no interest in that, because I'm interested in the fact that, a carrot has 600 different chemicals.
Yeah.
And we don't know yet.
Half of it. Even probably more than half of it.
We do know that if we just took one of them and put it into a vitamin, made that in a factory in China and said, this is, carrot vitamin, I could make a lot of money on it. But it wouldn't be the same as eating carrots.
Yeah. No, I really do like so much of the approach, Tim, and it's I've got to be honest. You talk about in food. It's one of my frustrations in medicine, actually, that I think we have become super, super reductionist in how we look at things, even to the point of this is a gut problem, this is a chest problem, this is a heart problem. And I get it, right? And I understand that there is merit in that. But actually, you sort of said something at the start of the conversation that a lot of your colleagues actually are stuck studying one area, and you have almost this kind of super generalist approach where one thing I've noticed is that you've pivoted quite a few times in your career with that sort of underlying theme of what you stand for. You know, you started with the twins and genetics, but you managed to pivot and apply those principles to lots of different areas, which I find really, really fascinating. You mentioned, Tim, the carnivore diet there. And I just want to spend a couple of minutes on it because it is something that is taking off hugely. Where do you come down on it in the sense that, let's say an individual patient, let's say it was one of your patients who was struggling with pain and all kinds of symptoms, and they, found someone on Twitter who was advocating it, and they then go away and start doing it, and a lot of their pain and symptoms go away, which is seemingly what is happening. What would you say to them based upon the research you've done, what you're seeing in your trials, what you know about the gut microbiome? Because for that individual, they're experiencing a benefit. So what should they do with that in view of what the research shows?
Well, I think they should.
It's a tricky question, I know.
No, it is, but it's a good question because, I have it as well. And a lot of people do come to me and say, listen, I've read your book, but I do very well on this.
Yeah.
So shut up, and I can't argue with that because, they know best what they feel like. All I say is that any diet that restricts you, I think is likely to cause long-term problems. So by people who've gone, whether it's high fat or high meat, means they are excluding other stuff. And some of that stuff they might have got rid of might have been very bad for them, lots of starchy carbs and things like this that didn't agree with them. All I would say is long term, if you deprive your gut of fiber, all the studies show, and one of the experiments was on my son who took McDonald's only for 10 days and took 3 years to recover.
You're a proper scientist. You know what I mean? You can't get the funding. Just put your son on the McDonald's diet.
Everyone should use their children. I think that's the message here. But no, so by all means, carry on doing what makes you feel good, but try and introduce some plants that aren't likely to mess up your blood sugar, that keep the, if it is this 70% fat, that, the keto diet thing, I absolutely do believe it works for some people. But I do think there has to be that short-term balance of improving those symptoms with a long-term one to say, well, you don't want to be messing up your gut microbes so you've got no immunity later on. Once you've got over your pain and your initial problem, you need to be, these can be just by eating lots of seeds. It can be eating a lot of herbs. It can be eating nuts. It doesn't have to be restrictive. So if people just keep in this mind that, okay, I can do these things, but I must try and maintain diversity. Yeah. What other ways can I feed my gut microbes? Then I'm very happy for people to do their own thing. Yeah. And I embrace it because I think, a lot of these things are trial and error, but don't be dominated by someone else telling you what worked for them because they had their special book and they cured it that way. Everyone's got to just look at the science and say, okay, I'll try this, but underlying it, I know long-term, I need to look after all the organs in my body. And your microbiome is one of the most important organs in your body.
Yeah, I think that's a really sensible approach, one that I very much agree with. And I feel also that it's not just food, actually. So let's say someone is crippled with pain and in symptoms, and that's how they go carnivore and that pain gets dramatically better. Well, also, there's a knock-on effect in terms of how they feel about themselves, their life, their stress levels. I've seen over and over again that persistently high stress levels can absolutely impact the way people feel after certain foods. I've seen patients who actually thought they were intolerant to a food, and actually what it appeared is that they were intolerant to actually eating in a stressed out state, like not switching off. And I'd be interested as your research continues, whether there'll be any work done on actually, stress levels whilst eating, how that impacts blood sugar response, how that impacts inflammation. Because I would imagine it will have a response, but I don't have the data to show. So do let me know if you study that at some point.
Well, yes, it's adding the stressometer to the recordings, but we, in a way, I think we are asking people about general contentment, how they're feeling at the time, and as they're logging on their foods.
Yeah,
and so we do get an idea of their well-being at various times in the day. So as well as sleep and exercise and fatigue and these levels, they're all interrelated. So I think we are going to start asking quantitative things about stress and see how that fits in. So I think, but you do need big numbers to do that. And that's, but we're now up to we've done about 4,000 people now in great detail. And hopefully with this commercial stage, we should be able to get to 100,000 people fairly quickly. And then we can answer these more subtle questions.
Wow.
And so there's really no limit if you can keep getting enough people to do these tests to work out what's really going on and realize how complex we all are.
Yeah. Tim, look, I could go on for hours. There's so much I want to talk to you about that we've not done yet. But I think we should close off this conversation. I think it's been a very different one to our first one, back on episode 1, all the way back. I would love to encourage people to pick up your book, Spoon-Fed Why Almost Everything We've Been Told About Food Is Wrong. I think for anyone who's got even the remotest interest in this area, I think they'll find it super enjoyable to read, but also illuminating. To sort of finish this off, Tim, I don't know if I used to ask this on episode 1 or not. I'll have to go back. I'm not sure I could bear to listen to myself on episode 1. But one thing I tend to ask people at the end is I say, well, this podcast is called Feel Better, Live More. When we feel better in ourselves, we get more out of our life. And in view of everything you've done with personalized nutrition in this book, but also in the Diet Myth before that, I'd love you to think about some really practical tips that people can think about now at the end of our conversation. They can think about applying them into their own life immediately to start improving the way that they feel.
First thing is to realize that everyone's unique. Okay, so once you realize that, you can explain a lot of the way you interact with health and food and exercise and your environment. And you should be free to self-experiment. And I want everyone to get out there and realize the amazing amounts of good, interesting foods are out there, and that I don't want people to read this book and get worried about themselves and the food environment and chemicals and whatever. It's really important that people remain fascinated about food and enjoy it, because it's an incredibly powerful bonding human experience, eating. So I want people to experiment, try some new dishes you've never tried before. Try going for a week without meat, or if you try only eating vegetables, or try skipping breakfast. Try doing things in a different way. So exercising after you've had your meal rather than before it. Try mixing everything up, really. And the important thing to realize is that if you can start to think of everything you put into your body is important, not just for the pleasure it gives you immediately, your metabolic responses, but also you're feeding your aquarium, if you like, or your tank of gut microbes. They can produce chemicals to make you feel happy and relaxed, and try and find that right balance. And it can take all of your life to find that, but if you can do it in a way that's fun and enjoyable, then that's the most important thing. So people shouldn't be stressed out about this. They should really take it as a positive challenge to try and improve themselves by understanding more about food and teaching everyone else about it. And I think we've all got so much to learn, and it's such an exciting area at the moment that I really want everyone to be passionately involved and everyone to be a citizen scientist.
I think a lot of people hear information about food and gut health and inflammation and the immune system, and often they get confused. So you are renowned as a global expert on these topics. And so I thought maybe we could start with the question, why is gut health so important?
Because it's a crucial organ in our bodies, and it is one of the few things that we can really control. So there's a huge range of gut health across the population. We know that we've lost half of our gut microbes compared to perhaps even 50 or 100 years ago. And that's affecting us in many ways. And yet it's not like genetics that you can't change. It's something that all of us can improve. And all of us needs to understand more about gut health so that we can improve many things in our life very simply just by altering our food choices. So it's becoming apparent that it's something that the public can change. You don't need doctors, you don't need specialists to do it. It's all within our power to really nurture and improve our gut microbes, which in turn are key for our gut health. So it influences everything to do with our body, our mood, our brain, and our metabolism, our weight, etc.
Yeah, a lot of people think about gut health and digestion, and they think, yeah, the guts, if I can get my gut functioning better, my gut's going to feel better. But as you say there, it's not just about your gut, is it? It's about many different things in the body.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, as you said, I think in the past people have said gut health, oh, that just means, to avoid heartburn or bloating or constipation or whatever it is. And now we know it's nothing like that. Even if you feel perfectly normal, you can have poor gut health, which is going to affect how long you live, how many chronic disease you get, whether you get allergies, whether your immune system's going to fight off COVID, all kinds of things, your mood the next day, your sleep, all things we hadn't even thought were related. So we have to think much more widely when we talk about gut health. I think it's nearly a sort of, it's like talking about holistic view of your body that comes back to the ancient Indian teachings that says it all comes from there, which if you said it that way sounds a bit pseudoscience, but if you just instead of that you call it the gut microbiome, then it's starting to make sense again.
Yeah. You mentioned that what's really great about the science of gut health is this idea that we don't need to go and see a doctor or a specialist. We can manipulate it, we can change it for ourselves. Now, as a fellow medical doctor, that's something I'm incredibly passionate about. How can we disseminate information to people that means they can be, I guess, the architects of their own health rather than need to rely on other people? What have you found since you started spreading that through your books, through your podcast, through all these mediums that you use? What sort of feedback have you had?
Well, amazing feedback, really, of people writing me letters, sending me presents, all kinds of messages saying that just reading my book, The Diet Myth or Spoon Fed, and saying it changed their way they thought about food. And actually they taught the rest of their family, and suddenly they're feeling healthier, they're feeling better. And there's nothing quite like that as a doctor, to feel that you've made not just a change to someone for a few weeks, but actually change something probably for the rest of their life. And that's incredibly empowering for me to know that just by writing some books and talking on podcasts, you can actually change people's attitudes long term. And so that really is a major motivating factor for me, rather than the hundreds of papers I've written that only a few academics read. I think getting these messages out and doing doctors out of a job is really what it spurs me on, and probably you too.
Yeah, for sure. And Tim, I've been really thinking long and hard over the past few years. What does it mean to be a medical doctor? For me, at least, in 2022. Because when I was at medical school, I always imagined it would be, I would make impacts by seeing people and helping them change their lives and, one-on-one, do some tests, make some changes. And of course, that has incredible value. But I've realized more and more, if we do our jobs right through spreading this information through the media, through podcasts and books, I kind of feel we're still doing our job as a doctor, just in a very different way.
Well, reaching many more people and being much more efficient about it, and not trying to just sort out the short-term problems, which I think is what modern medicine's still unfortunately dealing with, and predominantly dealing with pharmaceutical solutions to those problems. And that's just the way it's set up at the moment.
Yeah.
But I think we are seeing more and more. What I am thinking is optimistic is doctors like you and many others who are suddenly having a voice and speaking well, because it was very hard to find any doctors 10 years ago that would be prepared to do this without feeling they were going to be ridiculed or told off by their peers, or would simply not have the right language to appeal to the general public. So I think we're certainly, it was a bit more advanced in the US, I think, but certainly in the UK, we've been very behind, with doctors really scared to talk out and say what they think.
Yeah. In terms of practical things, we mentioned that improving our gut health can improve all kinds of things in the body. And you mentioned food as a powerful driver. It's a powerful tool to use for our gut health. What are some of the things that people should think about bringing into their diets to improve their gut health?
Well, the first thing I think is to realize that we're not really in an obesity crisis, we're in a food crisis. And that's because we've lost an idea of what good food is. And the first thing to do is to realize the difference between good and bad food, and forget a lot of what we've been told about calories and fats and sugars, and the fact that you can really tell a product by its calorie count or its percentage fat on a label. And most people don't really realize the difference between ultra-processed foods and whole foods, because they're the same category. A bread is a bread for most people. And so I think the first thing is to just realize that actually virtually all the population don't fully understand what food is. So I think educating more about what food is really important. Realize that quality is something we should be talking about, and we should absolutely stop talking about calories. So in a way, that's the first mindset shift I would like people to do. And everything we're doing now and doing with the company Zoe is to completely ignore the C word.
Well, I want to get to Zoe and personalized nutrition shortly, because I think that is really revolutionizing the way we are all going to think about our diets in the future. You mentioned you want people to forget thinking about calories. Now, to a lot of people, that's a very controversial statement. I happen to agree with you on that, but could you elaborate why is the idea of focusing on calories or even calorie counting, in your view, potentially problematic?
Well, there's several reasons. The first is that if you judge a food or choose a food based on its calories, you're ignoring the quality. And manufacturers of foods use calories to disguise the poor quality of the ingredients, all the other chemicals there that affect the highly processed, that's going to have lots of other negative effects on your body. Second is it's the estimates of how many calories are in it are wrong. Even in manufactured processes, they're sort of plus or minus 10%, and in restaurants, they're plus or minus about 200%. So you can't judge what's going in. You also can't work out how many calories you actually burn in a day either. Huge differences. The idea that all men have 2,500 calories is at all ages is complete nonsense. And different times of year and all kinds of factors mean it impossible that you can work out what the right amount of calories is. So even if you could accurately measure the amount of calories going into your body, it wouldn't be personalized for you, it wouldn't be worthwhile, and even if you do go on calorie restriction diets, over time your body adapts, and so it changes its metabolic rate, therefore equalizing. So that's why calorie restricted diets simply don't work. And also in this country and the US, people are, the more they go down those routes, the more they tend to go down low fat, low cal processed foods.
Yeah.
And so they're often swapping calories for quality. And this, we know that these other products of food, understanding what's in ultra processed foods, is actually will drive your hunger, drive your cravings, make you more tired, all kinds of things that they're not supposed to do, because we're just supposed to think about calories and fat content. And so it's driving people down the wrong direction. And that's why we've got it so wrong over the last 50 years. That's why obesity rates are going up, diabetes rates are going up, and ultra-processed food rates are still going up in the US and the UK, which are the two top countries in the world. So that's the first thing. So it's about firstly understanding, the differences between foods. There's a huge difference between, a cooking oil that's made in a highly processed way or olive oil. There's a huge difference between a bread that's bought in a supermarket that's been hanging around for a year, frozen and reheated in front of you, and a sort of artisanally made rye sourdough. Massive difference. And yet they're all called the same, and in most guidelines, that they'd be equivalent. So it's understanding those differences between ready meals and something you do yourself. It's all those nuances that we need to start thinking about much more than this ridiculous concept of calorie counting.
Yeah, I mean, I always say that, look, if someone's listening or watching this and they have found calorie counting helpful for them, I'm like, hey, go for your life. I'm not trying to change what anyone does if they're finding it useful. I've just never, ever found it useful with any of my patients at all.
Well, 1% might like it. So that's great.
So if it's working, great. A couple of things to respond there. A few days ago, because when did it come in the UK? Mandatory calorie labeling came in a few months ago?
Yeah.
And I was in a cafe down the road from here a few days ago, and I can't remember what I chose, but it had some avocados and had some nuts in it, and I think maybe some salmon. I can't remember what it was. And then when I looked at the ingredients or something, I was looking at the menu, then the calorie thing popped up. And I wasn't used to it because I'm not used to seeing calories on the food that I look at. And the calorie count was pretty high, actually. So now I happen to, I think, know a reasonable amount about nutrition and what foods are nourishing me. And I thought, wow, if you don't know, you may look at that calorie count and go, no, I'm not going to eat this because there's a lot of calories. I'm going to get something else instead, which may have lower calories, but may be ultra processed and have detrimental effects on multiple aspects of our body. That's one thing I wanted to mention. The second thing is this reductionist way in which we often look at food now and constitute parts of that food. It's become so reductionist that, particularly the focus on calories, that I think we're missing that big picture on what food is, on what quality food is. It's information, isn't it? It sends the body signals. It can influence our inflammation, our gut health, our mood, hormones, genetic expression, all kinds of things are influenced by food. And I think we forget that. And it goes back of mind when we simply look at just the calorie number.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're agreed we should ban it and get it, or in a font so small you can't see it on the label, which is what they do to the other interesting stuff that you do want to know about. But the restaurant stuff is interesting because New York introduced this over 10 years ago, and have been doing there've been lots of publications on it and show that it works for a few weeks and then ultimately fails, and then ultimately has a sort of reverse effect that people will choose the lower calorie options and eat much more of it than they would have done otherwise. So it's and if you talk to the people preparing the meals, they just guessing what's in those meals. They've got no real idea, and it's totally dependent on portion size, and so which can change so easily. So it's not only misleading, but it's also likely to be unhealthy for us. And it's just a tick box for governments to say, oh, I've done something that, you know, the food industry won't worry about, and they'll be quite happy to go along with it. And, you know, it ticks a box with doing something for people's health, but it is absolutely of no use, and totally agree. It's obscuring all the other good things that are in that food that people should be picking it on. So that's, yeah, we're agreeing. When you go to a restaurant, you know, look at the ingredients, not the calories.
If you enjoyed that conversation all about the negatives of eating too much sugar, I think you are really going to enjoy this one about the specific foods that you can eat to prevent disease.
We are actually all forming cancers in our body all the time. If you can prevent tumors from growing their blood supply, you can actually keep these cancers harmless. So this is what foods are able to do.